In the ancient land of Egypt, where the sun rises golden over the Nile and the sands stretch like a gentle blanket, there once ruled a pharaoh whose name was nearly lost to time. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she was a queen who became a king, not through war, but through quiet determination and a love for her people. Let us journey back slowly to the days of the New Kingdom, to a time when the great temples of Karnak were still young, and the scent of incense drifted through the halls of power. Imagine a young girl born into the royal family of the 18th dynasty. Her father was Thutmose I, a strong and respected ruler. She grew up surrounded by the hum of scribes, the whisper of priests, and the vast, silent gaze of the Sphinxes. She was clever, and she learned to read the sacred texts, to understand the stars, and to listen to the quiet voice of the god Ammon. When her father died, her half-brother Thutmose II took the throne, and she became his queen. But his reign was brief, and when he passed, the crown passed to his infant son, Thutmose III. The boy was too young to rule, and so Hatshepsut stepped forward not as a regent, but as a pharaoh. She did not seize power with a sword. Instead, she wove a story, a gentle myth. She claimed that the god Ammon himself had visited her mother and that she was destined to rule. She dressed in the traditional pharaoh's regalia, the false beard, the kilt, the crown, but she never forgot her own heart. She ruled from a place of peace, focusing on building, on trade, and on the quiet prosperity of her people. She sent expeditions to the distant land of Punt, a place of fragrant trees, myrrh, and gold. The ships returned laden with gifts, and the people marveled at the riches that came from beyond the horizon. Her greatest legacy was the temple at Deir el-Bahri, carved into the cliffs of the western Thebes. It rises in graceful terraces like a staircase for the gods. Pillars stand like silent sentinels, and the walls are painted with scenes of her journey to Punt and her divine birth. The colors have faded now, but in her time they were bright with life, blue, green, red, gold. She built it as a place of peace, a sanctuary where the sun could touch the earth gently. She also added to the great temple of Ammon at Karnak, raising 2 towering obelisks that caught the morning light. One still stands today, a slender finger pointing to the sky, as if whispering a forgotten prayer. For 20 years she ruled with a quiet hand. There were no great wars, no bloody conquests. She governed through trade, through diplomacy, through the steady rhythm of the Nile's floods. The land was at peace and the people prospered. But time is a river, and it carries away all things. When Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III, now grown, took the throne. Perhaps he felt overshadowed by her memory. Perhaps he wanted to write his own story. In the years that followed, her images were chiseled away from temples, her name was erased from cartouches, and her statues were buried in the sand. She was forgotten, as if she had never been. But the sands of Egypt are patient. They hold secrets for centuries. In the 19th century, archaeologists began to uncover her temple, her obelisks, her name hidden in the shadows. They pieced together the story of a woman who had ruled as a king, who had built with love, who had led without violence. Her mummy was found, too, in a simple tomb, wrapped in linen, her face peaceful. She had not been forgotten by the gods, only by men. And now we remember her again, softly, gently, like a whisper in the night. So when you close your eyes, think of Hatshepsut, standing on the terrace of her temple, watching the sun set over the Nile. The air is warm, the water glows, and the world is quiet. She is not a warrior queen, but a guardian of peace, a pharaoh who chose to build rather than destroy. And in that quiet reign, she found a kind of immortality, not in stone, but in the gentle rhythm of a story that was never meant to end. Imagine a land where the sun beats down with a fierce, golden light, and the horizon shimmers with heat. Yet in the midst of this vast, arid expanse, a ribbon of life unfolds, a slow, majestic river that has cradled a civilization for thousands of years. This is the Nile, the great artery of ancient Egypt. Its waters did not merely quench thirst, they shaped every breath, every heartbeat, every dream. As the sun sinks low, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, listen to the gentle lapping of the river against the papyrus reeds. This is the sound that lulled an entire people to sleep. The Nile's rhythm was the rhythm of life itself. Each year the river would swell, rising high and then receding, leaving behind a dark, fertile silt, the Black Land Kemet. This annual flood was not a disaster, but a blessing. It was the pulse of the earth, a slow, predictable dance of renewal. Farmers watched the stars and the water gauge, the Nilometer, to know when the flood would come. When the waters rose, they brought life. When they fell, they revealed fields ready for planting. The entire calendar was built around this cycle, the season of the flood, the season of the emergence, the season of the harvest. There was no need for frantic hurry. The Nile taught patience, trust, and a deep, abiding calm. In this world, sleep was not a luxury, but a natural part of the cycle. As the evening cooled, families would gather on the flat roofs of their mud-brick homes. The air grew soft, carrying the scent of lotus flowers and damp earth. The sound of the river was a constant lullaby, a gentle whisper that told of distant rains in the mountains of the moon. The stars emerged, one by one, reflected in the dark, still water. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul, the Ba, could travel at night, flying through the sky or sailing on the celestial Nile. Sleep was a journey, a time to visit the gods and the ancestors. The river's steady flow mirrored the passage of the sun and the stars, a reminder that all things moved in a grand, peaceful order. The Nile also provided the materials for sleep itself. The papyrus plant, which grew in thick stands along the banks, was not only for writing but for making mats, baskets, and even simple beds. Reeds were woven into soft, springy surfaces. Linen, made from flax, was cool against the skin. The wealthy had wooden headrests, carved into elegant shapes, to support the neck and protect the elaborate hairstyles. These headrests were often adorned with symbols of protection: the goddess Taweret, the hippopotamus who guarded mothers and children, or Bes, the dwarf god of laughter and sleep. They believed that while you slept, the gods watched over you, and the river's spirit kept away nightmares. The night was not silent, but filled with the sounds of the Nile. The croaking of frogs, the chirping of crickets, the occasional splash of a fish or a crocodile slipping into the water. These were not sounds of danger, but of a living, breathing world. The ancient Egyptians did not fear the night, they embraced it. The moon's light on the river was a silver path guiding dreams. They told stories of the sun god Ra, who journeyed through the underworld at night, fighting off the serpent Apophis, but always emerging victorious at dawn. This nightly battle was a reminder that even in darkness, there was hope and order. The Nile, too, flowed through the underworld, the duet carrying the souls of the dead. Sleep was a little death, but also a little rebirth. The daily rhythm was tied to the river's gifts: water for bathing, for drinking, for irrigating the crops of wheat and barley. The Nile provided fish, ducks, and the rich mud for making bricks, the reeds for boats, the feluccas that glided silently with the wind. Everything came from the river. When the harvest was gathered, there was time for festivals, for music, for dance. And then, as the sun set, the people would return to their homes, their hearts full of gratitude. They would lie down on their woven mats, listening to the water, feeling the cool breeze, and they would sleep, deeply, without worry, because the Nile would continue its eternal cycle, bringing life and renewal as it had for 1,000 years before and would for 1,000 years after. So tonight, as you find your own bed, let the gentle whisper of the Nile carry you. Imagine the slow, dark water, the rustle of papyrus, the distant cry of a night bird. Feel the rhythm of the flood, the ebb, the flow. Breathe in the scent of damp earth and lotus. And know that you, too, are part of a great, peaceful cycle. The river of dreams is waiting. Let it carry you home. Good night. Close your eyes, if you will, and let yourself drift back through the sands of time, to the banks of the great river Nile, where the golden light of the sun spills across a land both ancient and eternal. Here in the quiet villages of old Egypt, the day begins not with a rush, but with a gentle rhythm, the rhythm of the people, the river, and the earth itself. And at the heart of that rhythm lies a simple, sacred art, the making of bread and the brewing of beer. Let us wander together through this scene, unhurried, as if walking beside a calm canal at dusk. Picture a low, mud-brick house, its walls warm from the sun, and a courtyard where a woman kneels before a shallow clay hearth. She is not alone. Her hands, worn but tender, work a lump of dough made from emmer wheat, a grain older than memory. First, she had ground the golden kernels between two stones, a task of patience, the soft grit falling like fine sand into a basket. Then she mixed it with water from a clay jar, a pinch of salt from the desert, and perhaps a little sourdough starter saved from yesterday's baking, a living culture passed down through generations. She kneads slowly, her palms pressing and folding, the dough sighing under her touch. There is no hurry here. The bread is not just food, it is a companion to the day, a humble partner in the quiet work of living. She shapes the dough into flat, round loaves, sometimes scoring them with a simple cross, a sign of blessing, or perhaps a mark to help the gods find their share. The hearth glows low with embers, and she places the loaves on a clay dome over the fire, covering them with a second dome. The heat rises softly, like a breath, and the smell of baking wheat fills the air, warm, earthy, and comforting. While the bread rests, let us turn our attention to another vessel, a large, porous clay pot sitting in the shade. This is where the beer is born. The Egyptians called it HQT, a drink both everyday and sacred, shared by rich and poor, offered to the gods in temples. The process is gentle, almost meditative. The same emmer wheat or sometimes barley is sprouted, dried, and crushed into a coarse malt. This is mixed with water and date syrup, or perhaps a handful of ripe dates to sweeten the brew. Then it is left to ferment, not in haste, but in the quiet trust that nature will do its work. The yeast drifts in from the air, from the walls, from the hands of the brewer, and soon a thin foam appears on the surface, like the first breath of dawn. The beer is not clear and bubbly like ours, it is thick, porridge-like, and sipped through a straw to filter the grain. But its taste is alive with the sun and the soil, a connection to the land. As the afternoon lengthens, the bread is taken from the hearth, its surface golden and slightly charred. The brewer woman, perhaps the same woman, for bread and beer often share a kitchen, lifts the clay lid and dips a reed straw into the warm, frothy beer. She offers a bowl to her husband, who has come in from the fields, his limbs tired but his spirit calm. They sit together on a woven mat, breaking the bread, dipping it into the beer, sharing a simple meal. Outside, the Nile flows, unhurried, carrying the light of the setting sun. And in this tiny moment, the art of bread and brewing is not just sustenance, it is a prayer, a gift, a quiet echo of eternity. So now, as you feel the warmth of that ancient hearth, let your own breath slow. Imagine the scent of baked wheat, the gentle fizz of beer, the weight of a good day's work done with love. Let your thoughts drift like the smoke from the clay dome, and rest. Imagine a place where stone speaks, where the sun rises over a forest of pillars, and the air hums with the whispers of centuries. This is Karnak, not just a temple, but a living chronicle carved in sandstone, a testament to devotion that grew across 2,000 years. It lies on the east bank of the Nile, in the ancient city of Thebes, now called Luxor. Here the gods of Egypt, Ammon, Mut, and Khonsu, were honored not with a single building, but with a sacred precinct that expanded with each pharaoh's reign, like rings on a great tree. Close your eyes and picture a quiet dawn. The sky is pale lavender, and the first rays touch the tips of the tallest obelisks. They are monoliths of pink granite, quarried far to the south, ferried on barges, and raised with ropes and sweat. Each obelisk is a finger pointing to the heavens, a prayer in stone. The great temple complex of Karnak is not one structure but many, sanctuaries, pylons, chapels, and halls, all woven together by a single thread of faith. The main enclosure alone could hold several cathedrals within its walls. Walk with me now along the avenue of sphinxes. These creatures, part lion, part human, line the path that once led from the Nile to the temple's first pylon. Their faces are serene, carved with the features of pharaohs, watching over pilgrims who came to offer incense and prayer. The stone is warm underfoot, worn smooth by countless bare feet. The air smells of dust and dry earth, and a gentle breeze carries the sound of distant laughter from a village beyond the walls. Enter through the great pylon, a massive gateway that seems to hold up the sky. Its surface is covered with scenes of battle and ritual, Pharaoh smiting enemies, offering lotus flowers to Ammon. These are not just decorations, they are spells, records, and prayers, all meant to ensure order and balance in the universe. The ancient Egyptians believed that by carving these images, they made them eternal, so every king added his chapter to this stone book. Step into the great hypostyle hall. This is the heart of Karnak, a forest of 134 columns arranged in 16 rows. The columns are so thick that a dozen people holding hands could not encircle the largest ones. They rise like papyrus stalks, their capitals opening into carved lotus and palm shapes. High above, the stone roof remains, though the painted colors have mostly faded. But imagine them fresh, reds, blues, greens, golds, vivid as the day they were applied. Sunlight filters through clear-story windows, casting long shadows that shift slowly as the hours pass. The hall is cool, quiet, a place where sound becomes a soft echo. Beyond the hall lies the sacred lake, a rectangular pool fed by groundwater. Its surface mirrors the sky, and in ancient times, priests purified themselves here before rituals. The water is still, dark, and deep. Around the lake, smaller chapels and shrines stand, each dedicated to a different aspect of the divine. Here, a statue of the goddess Sekhmet, carved from black granite, sits with a lioness head, calm and watchful. There, a small obelisk marks the spot where the god Khonsu was believed to appear. Karnak is a chronicle of devotion because it was never finished. Each pharaoh added something, a new pylon, a colonnade, a gateway. They did not tear down what came before, they built around it, preserving the past while asserting their own piety. This layered growth makes Karnak a palimpsest, a document where older texts peek through newer ones. For example, the bark shrine of Pharaoh Sesostris I, a delicate white chapel, stands within a later court, a relic of the Middle Kingdom, preserved inside the New Kingdom's grand designs. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows shorten, the stone heats and the scent of baked earth rises, but within the inner sanctum, the air remains cool and dim. This is the Holy of Holies, where the statue of Ammon resided in a gilded shrine. Only the high priest could enter. The walls here are carved with offerings and hymns, their hieroglyphs still sharp. One inscription reads, Ammon, the hidden one, who comes at the sound of the cry of the poor. Such words remind us that devotion was not only for kings, but for all who sought comfort. Now the day wanes, the sun sets behind the western cliffs, and the sky turns gold and rose. The temple's stones glow warmly, and the silence deepens. Bats flutter from the ceiling of the hypostyle hall, and the first stars appear above the obelisks. Karnak has seen 2,000 years of sunset. It has survived earthquakes, floods, and the passing of empires, yet it remains a stone chronicle of human longing for the divine. And in this quiet hour, you can almost hear the ancient hymns, the murmur of prayers, the soft tread of priests on polished floors. So rest now, knowing that these stones have stood through countless nights, and they will stand through this one too. The devotion that built them is not lost. It is woven into the fabric of the earth, a lullaby of eternity. Sleep, and let the pillars of Karnak guard your dreams. Imagine, if you will, the vast, golden sands of ancient Egypt, stretching endlessly under the watchful eye of the sun. On the banks of the Nile, a civilization of profound belief and intricate ritual took shape. Among their many wonders, perhaps none is more mysterious or carefully crafted than the art of mummification, a sacred science dedicated to preserving the body for eternity. This is not a story of horror or fear, but of reverence, of a people's deep desire to journey safely into the next world, and to take their very form with them. The process begins not in a tomb, but in a place called the Beautiful House, or the Embalming Workshop. Here the air is thick with the scent of natron, a naturally occurring salt that would become the body's greatest ally against decay. The priests, dressed in white linen and wearing the mask of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, move with deliberate, quiet precision. Their work is both medical and spiritual. The first step is the removal of the internal organs, for these are the first to decompose. The brain is carefully extracted through the nose using a long, hooked tool and discarded, for the Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of intelligence and emotion. The heart was left in place, or sometimes removed, preserved, and returned to the chest cavity. The lungs, stomach, liver, and intestines were each removed, dried with natron, wrapped in linen, and placed in 4 sacred jars called canopic jars, each guarded by one of the 4 sons of Horus. Once the body cavity is cleansed with palm wine and spices, it is packed with packets of natron. The body itself is then covered in a thick layer of this salt, left to dry for 40 long days. Imagine the slow, silent transformation as water is drawn from every cell, leaving behind only a shell of skin and bone. The body darkens and shrinks, but its shape remains. This is the key, the removal of moisture, the enemy of decay. Without water, bacteria cannot thrive, and the tissues become stable, almost like leather. It is a natural process, but one guided by the hands of skilled artisans who understood chemistry without knowing its name. After the drying period, the body is gently washed again, anointed with fragrant oils of cedar, myrrh, and cinnamon. The skin is rubbed with resins to help preserve it and give it suppleness. The arms and legs are wrapped in layers upon layers of linen, each strip coated with sticky resin or gum. Sometimes small amulets are placed between the layers, each with a specific purpose. The heart scarab to ensure the heart does not testify against the soul, the Isis knot for protection. The wrappings are applied in a precise pattern, often in a crisscross or spiral, binding the body not just for preservation but for magical wholeness. The fingers and toes are individually wrapped, then the hands and feet, then the arms and legs, and finally the entire torso. The head is wrapped with special care, often with a portrait mask painted to resemble the deceased. By the end, the body is a tawny, human-shaped bundle, ready for its final journey. But why such elaborate care? For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end but a transition. The Ka, or life force, and the Ba, or personality, needed a physical anchor to return to each night in the afterlife. If the body decayed, the spirit would wander lost. Mummification ensured a permanent home for the soul. Moreover, they believed the heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth, in the hall of judgment. A preserved body meant a preserved identity, so the deceased could answer the gods and claim their place in the field of reeds, a perfect reflection of their earthly life. The science of mummification, then, is a blend of careful observation, practical chemistry, and profound faith. The embalmers knew that dryness and resin could halt decay. They used natron because it draws out water without dissolving the body's structure. They removed organs to prevent internal rot. They used aromatic resins to mask any odor and to repel insects. Through trial and error over centuries, they perfected a method that could preserve a body for thousands of years, as we can see today in museums around the world. Even modern scientists marvel at the effectiveness of these ancient techniques. So when you hear the word mummy, let it not conjure images of restless spirits or ancient curses. Instead, picture a quiet, dim chamber in the Valley of the Kings, where a mummy rests inside a stone sarcophagus, surrounded by paintings of gods and stars. Picture the slow, careful hands of a priest, the scent of resin and linen, the gentle rhythm of a prayer for safe passage. This is the science of mummification, a patient, loving effort to preserve what is most precious, so that the soul may find its way home. And as you drift, imagine the body not as a relic of death, but as a vessel of eternal hope, wrapped in the quiet embrace of the desert night. Imagine a world where the sun rises like a golden lotus over the endless blue of the Nile, where the air is filled with the gentle murmur of water and the distant call of a kingfisher. This is a village along the great river, where life is woven from the threads of the seasons, the river's pulse, and the patient hands of its people. As the first light touches the mud-brick houses, the village stirs. The women walk to the river's edge, their bare feet meeting the cool, damp earth. They carry clay jars on their heads, swinging in rhythm with their steps. The water is clear, tasting of the deep earth. They fill the jars, balancing them with grace, then return to their homes to kindle fires of dried reeds and date palm stalks. The scent of baking bread drifts through the narrow lanes, mingling with the smell of the river and the faint sweetness of flowering acacia. The men and boys gather at the water's edge, where the feluccas, sailboats with triangular sails, are moored. They speak in low voices, their eyes scanning the water for the best fishing spots. The nets are woven from flax, heavy with the morning damp. They cast them in wide arcs, and the sun glints on the droplets as they fall. The river is generous. Tilapia, catfish, and perch fill the nets, and the men laugh softly as they haul them in. The children play nearby, splashing in the shallows, their laughter echoing like the songs of the Nile. As the sun climbs higher, the village turns to the fields. The fields of emmer, wheat, and barley stretch along the riverbanks, irrigated by canals that carry the life-giving water. Men and women work together, bending over the grain with sickles of flint. The rhythm is slow, steady, a song of the earth. The water buffaloes stand in the shade of date palms, their eyes half closed, chewing lazily. The village is a symphony of simple sounds. The creak of a water wheel, the rustle of papyrus reeds, the soft thud of a pestle grinding grain. Noon brings a gentle stillness. The sun is high, and the heat wraps around everything like a warm blanket. The families retreat to the shade of their homes, where the walls are thick and cool. They eat simple meals, bread dipped in oil, fresh figs, and the sweet melons that grow in the fields. The elders sit on woven mats, telling stories of the gods, of Hapi, the god of the Nile, who brings the flood each year, and of Isis and Osiris, whose love and loss are remembered in the stars. The children listen, their eyes wide, dreaming of the great temples and the pharaohs who live in palaces of stone. In the afternoon, the village comes alive again. The women weave baskets from reeds and rushes, their fingers moving with practiced ease. The men repair tools, carve wooden boats, or shape clay into pots. A potter sits at a wheel, his hands guiding the spinning clay into delicate jars. The air is filled with the smell of wet earth and the soft hum of work. The village is a place of creation, where every object is made by hand, with care and patience. As the sun begins to sink, the sky turns to shades of rose and amber. The river reflects the colors like a mirror, and the water becomes calm, almost glassy. The fishermen return, their boats heavy with the day's catch. The women prepare the evening meal, the smell of grilled fish and roasted onions filling the air. Families gather on the rooftops, where the breeze is cool and the stars begin to appear. They talk of the day's work, the children's games, the gossip from the market. The sound of a reed flute drifts from somewhere, a simple melody that seems to rise from the river itself. Night falls softly, the village grows quiet. The only light comes from the stars and the sliver of the moon, reflected in the endless water. The Nile flows on, dark and deep, carrying the dreams of the village into the night. The people sleep on their rooftops under the open sky, lulled by the gentle lapping of the river. The world is peaceful, ancient, and eternal. And in this village along the Nile, life is a quiet, patient rhythm, a steady song that has been sung for thousands of years. Close your eyes if you like, and imagine a warm desert night. The sky is a deep, velvet blue, sprinkled with countless stars. A soft breeze stirs the sand, carrying with it the scent of ancient dust. And there, rising from the earth as naturally as a mountain, stands the Great Pyramid of Giza. It has been here for over 4,000 years, long before Rome was built, long before the birth of Christ. It is a monument not to a single king, but to the enduring power of human thought and patience. In the quiet sands of ancient Egypt, where the sun sets like a golden coin slipping beneath the horizon, there lies a book unlike any other. It is not a book you can hold in your hands, nor one you can read by candlelight in a hushed library. It is a guide, a map, a whispered companion for the soul's journey into the great unknown. This is the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions meant to help the departed navigate the perilous passage to the afterlife. Imagine, if you will, the heart of an Egyptian scribe bent over a sheet of papyrus, his reed pen dipping into ink made from soot and water. He copies the words with care, each hieroglyph a tiny painting in itself, a bird, a snake, a seated figure. These are not just words, they are keys. The book was not one single volume, but a custom-made scroll for each person, filled with chapters chosen to protect and guide them through the hall of judgment and into the field of reeds, a paradise of eternal peace. The journey begins the moment the breath leaves the body. The soul, called the Ba, takes the form of a bird with a human head, fluttering above the mummy. It must find its way through a dark underworld of caverns and lakes of fire, past demons with names like Eater of Hearts and Backward-Faced One. But the Book of the Dead offers comfort. Each spell is a password, a shield. For example, spell 125 is the most famous, the declaration of innocence before the god Osiris and the 42 assessors. The soul must say, "I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not killed." And the heart is weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth. If the heart is lighter than the feather, the soul is welcomed into the presence of Osiris, the god of resurrection, who sits on his throne in a hall of green and gold. But if the heart is heavy with wrongdoing, it is devoured by Ammit, the devourer, a creature part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, and the soul ceases to exist. This is not a story to frighten, but to remind us of the ancient belief that every action matters, and that kindness and truth are the lightest burdens a soul can carry. The Book of the Dead was not only for the wealthy. Even the simplest grave might contain a few spells written on a shroud. The most famous copy, the Papyrus of Ani, is now in the British Museum. Ani was a royal scribe, and his scroll is a masterpiece of art and devotion. Its illustrations show him kneeling before gods, his heart being weighed, his soul passing through gates guarded by serpents. The colors are still vibrant after 3,000 years, turquoise, ochre, crimson, as if the ink itself remembers the sun. As you drift towards sleep, think of the quiet confidence these ancient words gave to the dying. They were not afraid, for they carried their book like a lantern into the dark. The afterlife was not a punishment, but a continuation, a place where the soul could sail on a boat with the sun god Ra, or work in fields that grew grain taller than a man, or simply rest in the shade of acacia trees, listening to the music of the stars. And so the Book of the Dead remains, not as a relic of fear, but as a testament to the human longing for meaning beyond the grave. It whispers to us across millennia, "You are not alone, the journey is guided, the heart knows the way." And in the quiet of the night, as the stars wheel overhead, perhaps the spells still echo in the desert air, gentle as a lullaby. Imagine a quiet evening in the ancient world. The sun has set over the Nile, and the desert sands are cooling. In the city of Alexandria, scholars gather by lamplight, trying to read the sacred carvings on temple walls. But for centuries, those symbols remain silent. The language of the pharaohs, the beautiful hieroglyphs, has become a mystery, a forgotten tongue. Then, in the year 1799, a French soldier digging near the town of Rashid, called Rosetta by the Europeans, stumbles upon a broken slab of black stone. It is not large, about the size of a small table, but it holds a secret. On its surface, 3 scripts are carved: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs. This is the Rosetta Stone. And so begins a gentle story of discovery, a story not of battles or treasure, but of patience and quiet scholarship. The stone itself is a decree, issued in 196 BC, honoring the young pharaoh Ptolemy V. The same message is repeated in 3 different writings. The Greek is easily read, and it gives scholars a key. They can now compare the unknown hieroglyphs with the known Greek words. One by one, like a puzzle slowly assembled, the symbols begin to speak. A cartouche, an oval ring around a group of hieroglyphs, contains the name of Ptolemy. With that small clue, the door to an entire civilization cracks open. It took many years and the work of many gentle minds. The French scholar Jean-François Champollion, a quiet man who loved languages, spent his life studying the stone. He would sit for hours in his study, surrounded by papyri and drawings, tracing the curves of the ancient signs. He knew Coptic, the last living relative of the Egyptian language, and he used that knowledge to whisper the sounds of the old words. One day he realized that hieroglyphs were not just symbolic pictures, some were phonetic, representing sounds. He read the name of Ramesses, another pharaoh, and the silence of millennia was broken. It was a quiet triumph, a gentle unlocking. Now, thanks to the Rosetta Stone, we can walk through the temples of Karnak and read the stories on the walls. We can listen to the prayers of priests and the boasts of kings. The stone itself now rests in the British Museum, a calm visitor from the past. People stand before it in quiet reverence, looking at the three scripts side by side. The stone does not shout. It simply tells a story of a king, of a time long ago, and of a language that was lost and then found again. It reminds us that even the deepest mysteries can be gently unraveled with patience and a love of knowledge. And as you drift towards sleep, you can imagine those ancient scribes dipping their brushes in ink, carving these very signs. Their hands steady, their breath soft, their words waiting to be heard again. Imagine, if you will, a vast, silent sea of sand under a sky of deepening blue. The air is still, carrying only the faintest whisper of ancient winds. At the edge of this great plateau, where the earth meets the sky, there sits a creature of stone and mystery, the great Sphinx of Giza. For centuries, it has watched over the desert, its gaze fixed eternally eastward toward the rising sun. Its body, the powerful, reclining form of a lion, stretches across the bedrock, carved from a single ridge of limestone. And its head, shaped in the likeness of a king, perhaps Pharaoh Khafre himself, wears the royal Nemes headdress, its folds etched deep into the stone. We do not know exactly when it was carved. Some say it was built during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BCE, as a guardian of the nearby pyramids. Others whisper of far older origins, hidden beneath the sands of time. But what we do know is that the Sphinx has endured, through storms, through earthquakes, through the rise and fall of empires. It has been buried by desert sands, only to be uncovered again and again. It has been given names by the Greeks, the Strangler, and by the Arabs, Abu al-Hol, the father of terror. Yet in its stillness there is no terror, only a quiet, patient waiting. Let us walk slowly around it, feeling the cool stone beneath our fingers. The paws, each as long as a city bus, stretch forward. Between them a small chapel once stood, where offerings were made to the sun god. The body, weathered by millennia, shows layers of erosion, some from wind, some from water, which has puzzled scholars for generations. Was there once a great rainfall here long ago that shaped the stone, or is it merely the desert's slow, grinding touch? As the sun sets behind the pyramids of Giza, the Sphinx's face softens, its features becoming more gentle, more mysterious. Its nose is missing, broken off long ago, perhaps by a Sufi monk, perhaps by Napoleon's soldiers, perhaps by simple time. But the smile, if it can be called that, remains. It is the smile of something that knows more than it can ever tell. Throughout history, the Sphinx has been a symbol of riddles and wisdom. In Greek myth, it posed a question to all who passed. What creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? The answer, of course, is man, who crawls as a baby, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. But here in the quiet of the Egyptian night, the Sphinx asks no questions. It simply is, a silent witness to the turning of the stars. The sound of the wind is soft, like a lullaby. The sand whispers as it shifts. The sky fills with stars, and the Sphinx seems to breathe with them, its stone chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm of the earth. It is a place of profound peace, where the boundaries between past and present, between dream and reality, begin to blur. You can imagine yourself there, wrapped in the warmth of the desert night, listening to the echo of ancient footsteps, feeling the weight of eternity pressing gently upon your eyelids. Eventually, the moon rises, casting a silver glow over the plateau. The Sphinx's shadow stretches long across the sand, merging with the shadows of the pyramids. And in that quiet, shadowy union, all things seem possible. The stories of the builders, the priests, the travelers, all are still here, woven into the fabric of the stone. The Sphinx guards not just a place, but a memory of a time when the world was young and the gods walked among us. And as you drift deeper into the soft embrace of rest, let that memory carry you. Let the gentle desert wind be your guide and the silent Sphinx your guardian. There is nothing to fear here, only a deep, ancient comfort. Sleep now, as the stars wheel overhead and the sands of Giza hold you safe. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing on the warm sands of ancient Egypt thousands of years ago. The sun has set and the desert air cools around you. Above, the sky begins to darken, and one by one the stars appear, like tiny flames kindled in a vast velvet dome. The ancient Egyptians looked up at this same sky every night, and they saw not just lights, but a map, a sacred living calendar that guided their lives from the banks of the Nile to the halls of the pharaohs. Egyptian astronomy was born from the desert. Without the glare of city lights, the stars were brilliant, almost close enough to touch. The people noticed that certain stars rose just before the sun, heralding the changing seasons. One star in particular, the brightest in the night sky, held special meaning. They called it Sopdet. We know it as Sirius. When Sopdet appeared in the east just before dawn, it signaled the annual flooding of the Nile. That flood brought rich, black soil to the fields, and with it, life itself. So the Egyptians watched Sirius with reverence, marking its cycle with festivals and prayers. But they did more than watch, they measured. The Egyptians divided the night into 12 parts, using the rising of stars as hours. Their priests, who were also astronomers, would stand on temple rooftops or in open courtyards, observing the stars through notched palm leaves or simple sighting tools. They tracked the motion of the sun, moon, and 5 planets visible to the naked eye. They knew that the sun traveled through a band of constellations, which we now call the zodiac. In fact, the famous Dendera zodiac, a carved stone ceiling from a temple, shows many of the same constellations we recognize today, like Leo and Scorpius. The Egyptians gave them their own names and stories, weaving the stars into their myths. The most enduring monument to their skywatching is the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its sides are aligned almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. How did they achieve such precision without a compass? They used the stars. By watching 2 stars that circle the north celestial pole, they could find true north with astonishing accuracy. The pyramid's narrow shafts were also aimed at specific stars, perhaps toward Orion, which they associated with the god Osiris, lord of the afterlife. For the Egyptians, the stars were not distant suns, they were the souls of the blessed, the eternal home of the pharaohs. Astronomy was deeply woven into their religion. The goddess Nut, often painted arched over the earth, was the sky itself, her body studded with stars. Each night she swallowed the sun, and each morning she gave birth to it anew. The stars were her children, and their movements told stories of creation, death, and rebirth. The Egyptians believed that after death, the pharaoh would journey through the sky to join the imperishable stars, the ones that never set, circling the north forever. So they built their tombs and temples to mirror the heavens, aligning them with celestial events. The Temple of Karnak, for example, was oriented toward the rising sun on the winter solstice, a moment when light would pierce the inner sanctuary and illuminate the sacred statues. Their calendar was a gift from the stars. The Egyptians created a solar year of 365 days, divided into 3 seasons: inundation, emergence, and harvest. Each month was 30 days long, with 5 extra days added at the end for festivals. This calendar was not perfect. It drifted a little each year, but it was remarkably accurate for its time. They also used the rising of Sirius to fix the start of the new year, a day of celebration called the opening of the year. Imagine the priests gathering at dawn, watching the eastern horizon, waiting for that first twinkle of Sopdet. When it appeared, they would announce the new year, and the land would prepare for the Nile's blessing. But beyond the practical, there was wonder. The Egyptians saw patterns in the stars and named them. They saw a hippopotamus, a crocodile, a goddess with outstretched wings. They saw the Milky Way as a celestial Nile flowing across the sky. Their astronomy was not separate from their daily lives. It was a way of understanding time, nature, and the divine. When you look up at the stars tonight, you are sharing that same gaze, that same quiet awe with the astronomers of the desert. They mapped the heavens not with telescopes, but with patience, faith, and love. And their maps still guide us, reminding us that we are all children of the stars. So let the gentle rhythm of their ancient observations carry you into a peaceful sleep, under the same sky that has watched over humanity since the beginning. In the heart of Egypt, where the sun beats down upon a landscape of golden sand and rugged limestone cliffs, there lies a place of profound silence and ancient mystery. It is called the Valley of the Kings, a vast royal necropolis carved into the western bank of the Nile, opposite the timeless city of Thebes. For nearly 500 years, from the 16th to the 11th century before our era, this secluded valley served as the final resting place for the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, rulers who commanded armies, built temples, and shaped the course of civilization. But here, in the stillness of the desert, they sought something far greater than earthly power. They sought eternal life. As you imagine yourself standing at the entrance of the valley, the air is dry and warm, carrying only the faint whisper of wind through rock crevices. The cliffs rise up on either side, their faces worn smooth by millennia of wind and sand. The path ahead is narrow, winding deeper into the earth, as if the very landscape is inviting you to leave the world behind. This is a place of endings, but also of beginnings, a threshold between the land of the living and the realm of the dead. The Valley of the Kings was chosen with great care. Its natural shape resembles an amphitheater, with sheer walls that cast long shadows in the morning light. The ancient Egyptians believed that the west was the direction of the setting sun and the land of the dead. Here, they could build tombs that would remain hidden from grave robbers and protected from the elements. Over 60 tombs have been discovered so far, each one a unique passage into the underworld, filled with intricate carvings, vivid paintings, and spells from the Book of the Dead. One of the most famous tombs belongs to a young king named Tutankhamun, whose burial chamber was discovered almost intact in 1922. But long before that discovery, the valley held the secrets of great pharaohs like Ramesses II, Seti I, and Thutmose III. Their tombs were not just holes in the ground, they were elaborate corridors that mirrored the journey of the sun god Ra through the night. The walls were covered with scenes of gods, demons, and celestial boats, all meant to guide the pharaoh through the dangers of the afterlife. Imagine walking through those dimly lit passages, your torch flickering against paintings of jackal-headed Anubis and the great sky goddess Nut. But the valley is not only a place for the dead, it is also a testament to the living who built these wonders. Thousands of workers, artists, and craftsmen lived in a nearby village called Deir el-Medina. They spent their days chiseling stone, mixing pigments, and painting hieroglyphs, all while observing strict rituals to ensure the tombs remained sacred. Their homes were simple mud-brick houses, but their work was extraordinary. They left behind records of their lives, letters, sketches, and even graffiti that give us a glimpse into the human side of these grand monuments. As night falls over the valley, the stars appear one by one, reflecting off the pale rock. The silence deepens, broken only by the occasional call of a desert fox or the soft rustle of a scorpion moving across the sand. It is easy to imagine that the spirits of the pharaohs still linger here, watching over their earthly possessions. But there is nothing frightening about this place. It is a sanctuary of peace, where time itself seems to slow down. The modern world fades away, and you are left with only the gentle hum of eternity. The Valley of the Kings reminds us that all things pass, but the desire for remembrance endures. These tombs were built to last forever, and in many ways they have. Even today, archaeologists continue to uncover new chambers and secrets, each one a whisper from a civilization that reached across centuries to touch our own. So if you ever find yourself feeling anxious or restless, close your eyes and picture this valley, the quiet cliffs, the warm stone, the soft breeze carrying ancient stories. Let it carry you into a dream where the pharaohs sleep on, undisturbed, beneath the watchful sky. Close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the sands of time to the banks of the Nile, where the ancient Egyptians built their great temples and pyramids. They believed that life was a journey and that death was not the end, but a passage into a new world. a world where the heart would be weighed against a single feather, the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth, balance, and order. Imagine you are standing in the Hall of Two Truths, a vast, silent chamber carved from alabaster and lit by the soft glow of eternal lamps. The air is cool and still, and the only sound is the gentle whisper of linen robes as the guardians of the afterlife take their places. Before you is a great scale of pure gold, its balance beam perfectly level. On one side sits a delicate ostrich feather, shimmering with a light that seems to come from within. On the other side, an empty pan, waiting for the most precious thing you carry, your heart. The ancient Egyptians believed that your heart contained the record of your entire life, every thought, every word, every deed. It was not a physical muscle, but the seat of your soul, your true self. And when you entered the Hall of Two Truths, you would stand before this scale, and your heart would be placed in the balance against the feather of Maat. But you would not be alone. The jackal-headed god Anubis, the guardian of the dead, would gently take your hand and guide you to the scale. His movements are slow and deliberate, his eyes filled with compassion. He knows that this moment is the culmination of all your choices, and he is there to ensure the weighing is done fairly. Beside him stands the ibis-headed god Thoth, the scribe of the gods, holding a reed pen and a palette of ink. He will record the result, not with judgment, but with perfect neutrality. And what of the heart itself? As it is placed on the scale, it does not beat with fear. Instead, it glows with the light of your life. Each act of kindness, each moment of honesty, each time you chose love over anger, these add a tiny weight to the heart, making it lighter, not heavier. For the feather of Maat is not a burden, it is the ideal of harmony. To be weighed against it is to see how closely your life has matched the gentle rhythm of the universe. If your heart is light, if it balances perfectly with the feather, then you are declared true of voice. The gates of the field of reeds open before you, a paradise of lush gardens, cool waters, and eternal peace. You will be reunited with those you loved, and you will live in joy forever. This is the reward of a life lived with integrity. But what if the heart is heavy? What if it sinks the scale? The ancient Egyptians did not see this as a punishment, but as a natural consequence. A heart weighed down by lies, by greed, by cruelty, such a heart cannot ascend. It becomes a burden, and it is then that the devourer, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, would consume it. But even this is not a scene of horror. In the calm of this story, we see it as a release. A return to the elements, a chance for the soul to begin anew, to learn the lessons it missed. The weighing of the heart is not a tale of fear. It is a gentle reminder that our actions matter, that every choice we make adds a feather's weight to our soul. The ancient Egyptians understood that the universe is built on balance, and that living in harmony with truth is the most peaceful path of all. So as you drift towards sleep, imagine your own heart, light and free, resting on that golden scale. Feel the feather of Maat brushing against it, a soft touch of approval, and know that you too can find peace by living simply, honestly, and with love. The scales are always balanced, and the night is calm. Imagine a world where the stories of ancient civilizations were whispered on the wind, etched in stone, or painted on temple walls. But for the words that truly traveled, for the thoughts that were meant to be carried across generations, there was papyrus. This humble plant, growing along the banks of the Nile, became the paper that preserved history. Let us journey back in time, to a land where the sun was warm and the river flowed gently, where the reeds stood tall and the art of writing was born. Picture the marshes of Egypt, where the papyrus plant, Cyprus papyrus, rose from the shallow waters like green spears reaching for the sky. Its triangular stalks swayed in the breeze, and its feathery tops danced in the golden light. The ancient Egyptians watched this plant with wonder, for they saw in it not just a reed, but a gift, a way to capture the fleeting moments of life. They harvested the stalks with careful hands, cutting them close to the water, then peeling away the outer layers to reveal the soft, fibrous pith within. The process of making papyrus was a quiet, rhythmic labor. The pith was sliced into thin strips, which were laid side by side, then covered with another layer of strips running in the opposite direction. The layers were pressed together, and the natural sap of the plant acted as a glue, binding them into a single sheet. Then came the beating, a steady, gentle tapping with a wooden mallet, merging the fibers until the sheet was smooth and strong. After drying in the sun, the papyrus was polished with a smooth stone, ready to receive the scribe's ink. And oh, the scribe, the keeper of memory. He would sit cross-legged on the floor, a palette of black and red ink beside him, a reed brush in his hand. With slow, deliberate strokes, he traced the hieroglyphs, each symbol a tiny picture, a story within a story. He wrote of harvests and floods, of pharaohs and gods, of love and loss. He recorded the movements of the stars, the recipes for bread and beer, the spells for the afterlife. Each word was a thread in the great tapestry of human experience, woven into the papyrus scroll that would one day be rolled up and placed in a library, a tomb, or a temple. Those scrolls were precious. They were stored in wooden chests, clay jars, or leather bags, protected from the damp and the insects. The great libraries of Alexandria and Thebes held thousands of these rolls, each one a universe of knowledge. Scholars would come from distant lands, unrolling the papyrus carefully, reading by the light of oil lamps, their fingers tracing the ink, their minds connecting with voices from centuries before. But time is relentless. Papyrus is fragile. It can burn, it can rot, it can crumble to dust. The dry sands of Egypt, however, became a perfect guardian. In tombs and hidden caves, scrolls survived in the arid climate, waiting to be discovered again. When archaeologists first found these ancient texts, they held their breath, unrolling them with the greatest care, for each fragment was a treasure. The words of priests, poets, and accountants, all preserved on the same simple material, the pressed pith of a marsh plant. So when you think of papyrus, think of the gentle rustle of reeds in the breeze, the patient hands of the craftsman, the steady brush of the scribe, and the quiet passage of millennia. This paper did not merely record history, it held it, like a vessel floating on the river of time. And though many scrolls have turned to dust, those that remain whisper to us still, reminding us that even the most delicate things can carry the weight of ages, if only we treat them with reverence. So rest now, knowing that the past is not lost. It is written in papyrus, waiting for you to dream of its stories. Long ago, before the desert winds carved the pyramids, before the Nile painted the valley green, the people of Egypt looked up at the stars and saw a peaceful family watching over them. The gods of Egypt. They were not gods of thunder or war, but gods of the sun, the moon, the river, and the soil. They lived in harmony with the land, and their stories whispered through the reeds like a gentle breeze. First came Ra, the sun god. He sailed across the sky each day in a golden boat, his light bringing warmth to the fields and comfort to the people. Every morning he rose from the eastern horizon, and every evening he descended into the underworld, only to be reborn again at dawn. The Egyptians would wake with the sun, thank Ra for a new day, and go about their peaceful tasks, planting, weaving, singing. There was no rush, only the steady rhythm of light and shadow. Beside Ra stood Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and joy. She wore a crown of cow horns cradling the sun, and her eyes were as deep as the Nile. When people danced beneath the stars, they felt her presence. When mothers cradled their children, they whispered her name. She was the gentle laughter of the marketplace, the string of a harp, the cool water offered to a traveler. Hathor reminded everyone that even in the hard work of life, there is always room for joy. Then there was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing and wisdom. He kept the great library of the heavens, recording all that had ever happened and all that would come. He taught the Egyptians how to count the seasons, how to write their names, how to measure the floodwaters of the Nile. He was patient and still, like an old scribe sitting by a lamp. When people were confused, they would pray to Thoth, and he would guide their thoughts like a quiet river. Perhaps the most beloved of all was Osiris, the god of the underworld, but do not be frightened by that name. His realm was not a place of punishment, but a peaceful garden where souls rested after their long journey. Osiris himself had been a kind king on earth, teaching the people to farm and to live in peace. After he passed into the next world, he became the judge of souls, weighing each heart against a feather, the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and balance. If a heart was as light as a feather, that soul would enter the field of reeds, a paradise of cool waters and endless harvest. Maat herself was everywhere, though she was rarely seen. She was the order in the stars, the balance of day and night, the gentle rhythm of the Nile's flood. The pharaohs swore to uphold Maat so that the land would remain calm and prosperous. When you picture Egypt, picture Maat, a woman with an ostrich feather in her hair, sitting quietly at the center of everything, holding the universe together like a weaver's thread. And do not forget the gentle cat goddess Bastet, who protected the home. She was often shown as a woman with the head of a cat, or simply as a graceful feline. Cats were cherished in Egypt. They kept the granaries free of mice, and they loved to curl in sunbeams. Bastet was the warmth of the hearth, the purr of contentment. People would offer her small bowls of milk and sing soft songs. She watched over children and kept nightmares away. The Egyptians did not fear their gods. They saw them as family, a mother, a father, a wise uncle, a playful sibling. The temples were not dark or frightening. They were open to the sky, with pillars carved like lotus flowers and statues that seemed to smile. Priests and priestesses would walk barefoot, carrying incense that smelled of frankincense and myrrh. The air was still, and the only sound was the whisper of prayers and the trickle of sacred water. As you rest here, imagine those ancient nights along the Nile. The stars above, the soft lapping of the river. The gods are not distant. They are the moonlight on the water, the rustle of papyrus, the calm breath of the earth. Let their peaceful stories carry you into a gentle sleep, where you too may sail with Ra at dawn and rest with Osiris at dusk. Good night, and may the gods of Egypt watch over your dreams. Long ago in the ancient land of Egypt, where the great Nile River wound like a silver serpent through golden sands, there lived a queen whose name would echo through the ages, Cleopatra. She was not merely a ruler, but the last pharaoh of a dynasty that had endured for nearly 300 years. Her story is one of intelligence, charm, and a fierce love for her kingdom. And it begins in the bustling city of Alexandria, a jewel on the Mediterranean coast. Picture the scene, a city of white marble and towering libraries, where scholars from every corner of the world gathered to study the stars and the secrets of the universe. Cleopatra was born into this world of learning around 69 BC into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a family of Greek origin that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great. From her earliest days, she was taught to be a scholar and a diplomat. She could speak 9 languages, including Egyptian, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, which was rare for a ruler of her time. She studied philosophy, astronomy, and medicine, and she understood the hearts of her people, because she chose to learn their ways, to speak their tongue, to honor their gods. When her father died, Cleopatra was thrust into a world of political intrigue. She was only 18 years old, and she shared the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was just a boy. But the court was full of whispers and plots, and soon Cleopatra was forced to flee into exile. Yet she did not give up. She gathered an army, and she waited for the right moment to reclaim her birthright. That moment came when a powerful Roman general, Julius Caesar, arrived in Alexandria. Cleopatra saw an opportunity, and she took it. Legend tells that she had herself rolled up in a carpet, or perhaps a linen sack, and smuggled into Caesar's chambers. When the carpet was unrolled, there she stood, a queen of grace and determination. Caesar was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her wit, her knowledge, her fire. Together, they formed an alliance that would change the course of history. Caesar helped Cleopatra defeat her brother, and she became the sole ruler of Egypt. She bore Caesar a son, named Caesarion, and for a time, Alexandria was the center of the world, a place where Roman power and Egyptian mystery met in a dance of silk and gold. But all things change. Caesar was assassinated in Rome, and Cleopatra's world was shaken. She returned to Egypt alone, yet still a queen. Soon, another Roman came into her life, Mark Antony, a general and a friend of Caesar. Their meeting was like a story from the old myths. Antony fell deeply in love with Cleopatra, and she with him. Together, they dreamed of a great empire uniting the East and the West. They had 3 children, and they ruled from Alexandria in a court of dazzling splendor. They would spend long evenings on the royal barge, drifting along the Nile, listening to music and discussing philosophy under a canopy of stars. But Rome was not kind to dreamers. Another Roman, Octavian, saw Antony and Cleopatra as threats. War came, and at the Battle of Actium their fleet was defeated. Antony, believing Cleopatra had died, fell on his own sword. When he learned she still lived, he was carried to her tomb where he died in her arms. Cleopatra knew that Octavian would parade her through Rome in chains. She would not allow it. In a quiet room, she prepared herself for her final act. She dressed in her finest robes, placed a diadem on her head, and allowed a venomous snake, an asp, to bite her arm. Or perhaps she used poison. The details are lost to time, but what remains is the image of a queen who chose death over humiliation. With her passing, the great dynasty of the Ptolemies ended, and Egypt became a province of Rome. The temples grew quiet, the libraries slowly emptied, and the sands of time began to cover the footprints of the pharaohs. Yet Cleopatra's story did not die. It lived on in the writings of historians, in the art of painters, in the songs of poets. She became a symbol of intelligence, courage, and the enduring power of a woman who dared to rule. And so, as you drift towards sleep, think of Cleopatra not as a figure of tragedy, but as a woman who loved her land, who spoke to her people in their own language, and who, even in her final moments, held her head high. The stars over Alexandria still shine, the Nile still flows, and somewhere in the quiet of the desert night, the last pharaoh still whispers her story to the wind. Long before the great pyramids rose from the sands, before the temples of Karnak stood tall against the sky, the people of Egypt learned to build with the land itself. They began with mud, the dark, fertile mud of the Nile. Every year the river would swell, covering the fields with a thick, silky silt. When the floodwaters receded, the mud lay warm and soft under the sun, waiting to be shaped. The Egyptians would mix this mud with straw, often from the barley harvest, to give it strength. They would tread it with their feet, a slow, rhythmic dance, or pound it with wooden mallets. Then they would press the mixture into rectangular wooden molds, smooth and simple, and leave them to bake in the relentless Egyptian sun. Day after day, the bricks would dry, turning from dark brown to a pale, dusty gold. These mud bricks, called adobe by some, were the backbone of everyday life. Farmers built their homes from them, small rooms with flat roofs where families could sleep under the stars. Even the great palaces and storehouses were made of mud brick, rising in layers, each brick placed by hand, one upon another, with a thin mortar of the same mud to hold them together. The walls were often thick, to keep the heat out and the cool in, and they would be plastered with a finer mud, sometimes whitewashed with lime to reflect the sun. Inside, the walls might be painted with scenes of daily life, fishermen on the river, geese in the marshes, or simply patterns of red and blue. But mud brick had its limits. It could not stand forever against the rain, the wind, or the weight of towering monuments. For the eternal homes of the gods and the pharaohs, the Egyptians turned to stone. Stone was not just a material, it was a statement of permanence, of the divine. They quarried it from the cliffs along the Nile, from places like the great limestone quarries at Tura, across the river from Memphis. The work was slow, patient, like the river itself. Workers would hammer wooden wedges into natural cracks in the rock, then soak them with water. The wood would swell, splitting the stone with a sound like a deep breath. Enormous blocks, some weighing as much as 100 men, were then eased onto wooden sledges. The sledges slid over logs laid as rollers, and hundreds of workers would pull together, chanting in rhythm. They poured water on the sand in front of the sledge to reduce friction, a simple trick, but a brilliant one. The sand became just a little slick, and the stone would glide forward inch by inch toward the river where boats waited to carry the blocks to the building site. The boats themselves were marvels, made of short planks of acacia wood, tied together with ropes, not nails. They were flexible and could ride the river's gentle swells. Once at the site, the real artistry began. The stone blocks were lifted into place using ramps of mud brick and rubble. These ramps were built in long, gentle slopes, winding around the growing structure. Workers would haul the blocks up the ramp, and at the top, they would lever them into position with wooden poles and copper chisels. The blocks were so precisely cut that sometimes you cannot fit a knife blade between them. They did not use mortar at first. The weight of the stone itself held everything together. The outer surfaces were then dressed with harder stones, like granite from Aswan, brought down the Nile on barges. Granite is almost as hard as iron, but the Egyptians worked it with dolerite balls, pounding the surface patiently, hour after hour, to give it a smooth, polished finish that would gleam in the morning light. The stone was alive to them. They believed that the gods dwelled within the rock, and that by carving a temple, they were freeing the divine form from its earthly prison. The great columns of the hypostyle halls were carved to look like papyrus stalks or palm trees, their capitals opening like flowers. The walls were covered in hieroglyphs and reliefs, each line carved with a steady hand, telling stories of offerings, battles, and the journey of the sun. And always the sun was there, baking the mud brick, warming the stone, casting long shadows that stretched across the desert. The builders worked in harmony with the seasons. In the summer, when the Nile was low, they quarried. In the autumn, after the flood, they transporting the stone by water. In the winter, they built. And in the spring, they celebrated. The work was not rushed. A temple might take 100 years to complete, passing from one generation to the next. The same hands that shaped mud brick for a home might one day help lift a block of granite for a king's tomb. And so, the land of Egypt rose, not in a single moment, but slowly, like the river itself, building a world of mud and stone, of sun and water, of patience and devotion. And when you stand before those ancient walls today, you can still feel that quiet rhythm, the gentle pulse of a people who knew that building was not just about structure. It was about life and memory and the slow, steady passage of time. Long ago, in the golden sands of Egypt, there lived a language that was never meant to be heard. It was a language of images, of carved and painted symbols that whispered across the ages without making a sound. This is the art of hieroglyphic writing, the symbols of silence. Imagine the banks of the Nile, under a sky of deep indigo turning to soft apricot as the sun begins to set. A scribe sits cross-legged on a reed mat, his brush made from a frayed stem of rush, his palette a simple wooden board with wells of black and red ink. He dips the brush and begins to draw, not letters but pictures. A hawk, an eye, a loaf of bread, a coiled rope. Each one is a word or a sound or an idea. And together they tell stories of pharaohs and gods, of harvests and journeys into the afterlife. The word hieroglyph itself comes from the Greek hieros meaning sacred and glyphine meaning to carve. And indeed, these symbols were first carved into stone, slowly, patiently with copper chisels and wooden mallets. The stone was limestone or granite, and the carver would follow faint red guidelines drawn by the scribe. Every curve of a feather, every angle of a throne had to be precise, because these symbols were not just decoration. They were magic. They held the power to make things real in the world beyond. In the temples of Karnak and Luxor, the walls are covered with these silent voices. They speak of offerings made to Amun-Ra, of battles won against the enemies of order, of the pharaoh's divine birth. But they speak without sound. You can stand before them and hear nothing, yet your eyes read the story and your mind hears the ancient chants. That is the miracle of hieroglyphs. They are symbols of silence that become sound inside your head. The scribes who wrote them were among the most respected people in Egypt. They spent years learning the hundreds of signs, some phonetic, representing sounds like our alphabet, others logographic, representing whole words or ideas. A single sentence could mix both. For example, the word for scribe was written with a palette, a water pot, and a reed brush, a picture of the tools of the trade. And to make sure you understood, they often added a small seated figure of a man holding a brush, a determinative that told you the word belonged to the world of writing. But hieroglyphs were also used for more than sacred texts. They appear on tomb walls, on coffins, on papyrus scrolls. The most famous of these scrolls is the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and prayers to guide the soul through the underworld. The symbols there are painted in black and red ink, with delicate illustrations of the weighing of the heart, the ferryman of the dead, the fields of reeds. Each symbol had to be drawn with care, because if a sign was missing or wrong, the spell might not work. The silence of the symbols held the power of life after death. And then there is the Rosetta stone, a slab of black granodiorite that became the key to unlocking this silent language. In 1799, French soldiers found it near the town of Rashid. On it, the same decree was written in 3 scripts: Hieroglyphic, Demotic, a simpler cursive form, and Greek. Scholars like Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion worked for years to compare the texts. Champollion, lying in bed one night, suddenly realized that the hieroglyphs for the name Ptolemy were written inside a cartouche, an oval ring, and that they were phonetic, not just symbolic. His heart raced, but he stayed calm. And slowly, the silence of thousands of years began to speak. Today we can read hieroglyphs as easily as we read our own alphabet, but there is still a quiet mystery about them. When you look at a wall of carved symbols, you are seeing the thoughts of someone who lived 40 centuries ago. They are not shouting at you, they are simply there, patient, silent, waiting for you to look and to understand. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself in the dim light of a tomb, the air still and cool. The walls are covered with painted figures, a pharaoh making an offering, a goddess with outstretched wings. The symbols are like tiny windows into another world. They do not need sound. They are the art of silence, and they speak directly to your heart. So close your eyes now. Let the quiet images float before you. The hawk, the ankh, the scarab beetle, each one a gentle whisper from the past. And know that even in the deepest silence, there is always a story waiting to be heard. Close your eyes if you like, and let your mind drift back through the sands of time, to a place where the sun and moon have kissed the stones for thousands of years. The temple of Luxor, on the east bank of the Nile, stands not as a ruin, but as a sanctuary of light and shadow, where every pillar, every carving, every breath of warm air tells a story of devotion and eternity. Imagine walking along a long avenue lined with sphinxes, their serene faces half-lit by the fading golden light. The ground beneath your feet is smooth, worn by countless pilgrims who came here long before us. As you approach the great pylon, 2 colossal statues of Ramesses II rise up, their stone eyes gazing across the river as if they can still see the processions of priests and pharaohs. The sun begins to set, casting long, soft shadows that creep across the courtyard like gentle fingers of dusk. Step through the grand entrance into the first open court. Here, the rows of towering columns are like a forest of stone papyrus stalks, each one carved with delicate hieroglyphs and images of gods offering blessings. The air is still, and you can almost hear the distant echo of a harp or the murmur of prayers whispered in the ancient Egyptian tongue. The light filters through the gaps between columns, creating a dance of light and dark that moves slowly as the sun descends. Now walk deeper into the hypostyle hall. The ceiling above is painted with stars, faded but still visible, a map of the night sky that guided the builders and the faithful. The shadows here are deeper, cooler, and the scent of dry stone mixes with a faint hint of jasmine from the gardens outside the temple walls. You pause to look at a relief on the wall, the god Amun-Re, with his tall feathered crown, receiving offerings from the king. The carving is so delicate, so patient, that you can feel the love and reverence of the artist who made it. Move further into the inner sanctuary, the heart of the temple. This is a small, dark chamber where the sacred bark of the god once rested. In ancient times, only the high priest and the pharaoh could enter here. The walls are cool to the touch, and the silence is profound, like the quiet before dawn. A single shaft of light from a small opening in the ceiling falls on the floor, illuminating a tiny patch of ancient stone. It is said that at certain times of the year, the rising sun aligns perfectly to touch the innermost statue of Amun, awakening him from his nightly slumber. Turn and retrace your steps through the halls, but now the temple is lit by the soft glow of oil lamps and torches. The shadows flicker, making the carved figures seem to move, a dance of gods and kings in the dim light. Outside, the Nile flows silently, and the sound of water lapping against the riverbank is a lullaby that has played for millennia. The stars are beginning to appear, one by one, above the pylons. The Temple of Luxor was not just a place of worship. It was a living symbol of the cycle of day and night, life and death, light and shadow. Every year, during the Opet festival, the statues of Ammon, Mut, and Khonsu would travel from Karnak to Luxor in a grand procession, carried on sacred barks by priests. The streets would be filled with music and dancing, and the temple would glow with the light of 1,000 lamps. But tonight, all is still. Only the moon casts its silver light on the stone, and the shadows rest quietly in the corners. As you stand in the great colonnade, looking down the long row of columns that seem to stretch into infinity, you feel a sense of peace. The temple is a bridge between worlds, the world of the living and the world of the gods, the world of light and the world of shadow. It holds its secrets gently, like a mother holding a sleeping child, and in this quiet moment, you are part of that eternal stillness. Let your breath slow, let your thoughts drift like the Nile current, and rest here in the sanctuary of Luxor. In the land of ancient Egypt, where the sun blazed golden over endless sands, there was a rhythm that held all life in its gentle embrace. It was not the beat of a drum, nor the chant of a priest, but the slow, patient pulse of the great river Nile. Each year, as the summer heat grew heavy and the sky turned hazy with dust, a quiet miracle would begin far to the south, in the highlands of Ethiopia. There rains would fall, swelling the tributaries, and the waters would begin their long journey northward, carrying with them a gift that no king could command and no treasure could buy. This was the Nile flood, known to the ancient Egyptians as Hapi, the bringer of life, the renewer of the land. It was not a violent torrent, but a gradual, almost gentle rising, as if the river itself were taking a deep, slow breath. The water would creep over the banks, spreading across the parched fields like a soft blanket, turning the dusty brown earth into a vast, shimmering mirror that reflected the sky. For weeks, the flood would cover the land, and from a distance, the villages and temples seemed to float on a silver sea, their mud-brick walls and stone pillars rising from the water like islands of memory. And then, as the flood receded, it left behind something precious, a layer of rich, dark silt carried from the mountains thousands of miles away. This silt was the true miracle, a gift of renewal that made the desert bloom. The farmers would step out onto the damp, fertile soil, feeling it crumble beneath their feet, and they would sow their seeds, wheat, barley, flax, knowing that the flood had brought them a new year of life. The fields would soon turn green, then golden, and the harvest would fill the granaries, feeding the people, the animals, and the gods in their temples. The Egyptians did not take this for granted. They watched the river with reverence, marking its rise and fall with careful records on temple walls and papyrus scrolls. They sang hymns to Hapi, praising him for his abundance, and they built festivals to celebrate the flood's arrival. The great Niliometer, a stone staircase built into the riverbank, would measure the height of the water, and if it was just right, neither too low nor too high, the people would rejoice, for it meant a season of plenty. A low flood meant famine, a high flood meant destruction. But most years, the river was kind, and the flood was a gentle, steady embrace. Think of it now, under the quiet stars, as the water rises slowly, inch by inch, over the fields and around the palm trees. The sound of the river is a soft murmur, a lullaby that has been sung for thousands of years. The frogs and birds join in, their calls drifting across the floodplain. The temples of Karnak and Luxor, with their towering columns and carved hieroglyphs, stand as silent witnesses, their foundations rooted in the same silt that the flood brought a millennium ago. The ancient Egyptians believed that the flood was the tears of Isis, weeping for her lost husband Osiris, and that each year the river brought life back to the land, just as Osiris was reborn in the underworld. Today, the flood no longer comes as it once did, changed by dams and modern engineering. But the memory of it remains, woven into the very soul of Egypt. When you close your eyes and listen to the gentle whisper of the Nile, you can still feel that ancient pulse, the slow, patient rhythm of renewal. The water rises, the land is blessed, and life begins again, over and over, like a dream that never ends. So let the image of that golden floodplain carry you into rest, where the river flows timeless, and the silt of 1,000 harvests lies soft beneath the moonlight. The Nile flood was not just a natural event, it was a promise that every year, even in the driest desert, renewal would come, gentle and sure, like a mother's hand smoothing a child's brow. And as you drift, you too can feel that promise, a quiet assurance that all things rise and fall, and in that falling, there is always the seed of something new. Imagine a land of golden sands, where the sun beats down on ancient stone and the wind whispers secrets of a forgotten time. In the Valley of the Kings, a place of silence and shadow, the earth held a magnificent secret for over 3,000 years. It was the year 1922, and a man named Howard Carter, an archaeologist with a patient heart and a determined spirit, was searching for something many believed was lost forever, the tomb of a young pharaoh named Tutankhamun. For years he had dug and sifted, his hopes rising and falling with each empty trench. Funding was running out, and the world had grown tired of his quest, but Carter felt a quiet certainty, a gentle pull toward a patch of ground beneath a cluster of ancient workers' huts. He ordered his men to dig there, and on a November morning they uncovered a step carved into the rock. Step after step emerged, leading down into the earth. It was a staircase. And at its bottom, a door sealed with the royal insignia of a long-gone king. Carter's heart beat a soft rhythm of wonder, not of panic. He sent a telegram to his patron, Lord Carnarvon, who arrived weeks later. Together, they broke through the first door, revealing a rubble-filled corridor. Beyond a second door, there was a hush, a breath held by time itself. Carter made a tiny hole in the plaster, lit a candle, and peered inside. Lord Carnarvon, waiting in the darkness, asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter's voice, when it came, was a whisper of awe. Yes, wonderful things. What he saw was a chamber, a room of gold, of shadows, and of ancient life. Gilded couches in the shapes of beasts, chariots, chests of ivory and ebony, and statues of the boy king standing guard. It was not a tomb of death, but a palace of the afterlife. The world held its breath. For months, Carter and his team carefully catalogued every object, a slow, reverent dance with history. They found treasures beyond imagination, a throne of gold and lapis lazuli, a golden mask of exquisite serenity, and the king's own body, lying in a nest of gold coffins, preserved for millennia. The discovery was not a story of curses or drama, but of quiet revelation. It showed us the beauty and humanity of a young king who had died at just 19 years of age. Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun, had been forgotten, his tomb hidden by debris from later pharaohs. But in that hidden chamber, he waited, not for a curse, but for a gentle hand to bring his story back into the light. Today, the treasures of Tutankhamun speak of a civilization that loved life, that honored death, and that believed in the eternal journey of the soul. The tomb of the boy king is a testament to the patience of discovery, the power of wonder, and the soft, enduring light of history. As we drift toward sleep, let us carry that image with us, a candle flickering in the dark, a gold gleam on ancient stone, and the quiet voice of an explorer saying, "Yes, wonderful things." Close your eyes and let yourself drift back to a time when the great river Nile flowed through a land of golden sand and emerald fields, to ancient Egypt, where healing was woven from the threads of nature and the whispers of the divine. In the shadow of towering temples and beneath a sky painted with stars, the Egyptian physician, known as the SWNW, walked a path that blended science and spirit. They believed that health was a balance of the body's humors, the flow of life force they called Ankh, and that illness could come from angry gods, restless spirits, or simply from the body losing its harmony. To restore that harmony, they turned to two great allies, the herbs that grew along the Nile's fertile banks and the spells that echoed in the halls of the gods. Imagine a healer's chamber, clay jars lined with wax, filled with dried leaves and powders. The air smelled of myrrh, frankincense, and the sweet scent of honey. Honey, golden and thick, was a sacred gift, used to clean wounds and soothe burns, for it never spoiled, and the Egyptians saw it as the tears of the sun god Ra. They would mix it with grease and plant fibers to make a poultice, and whisper a prayer over the patient's skin. Then there was castor oil, pressed from the seeds of the ricinus plant. They used it to soften skin, treat eye infections, and as a gentle laxative. The healers knew that the seeds themselves were poisonous, so they boiled and strained them with care, a knowledge passed from master to apprentice, from one generation to the next. Along the river, they gathered willow bark, the very same that would one day give us aspirin, and used it to ease pain and fever. They boiled it into a tea, and while the patient drank, the healer would chant a spell to drive out the setek, the demon of illness. Spells were not separate from medicine, they were the medicine's voice. The Ebers Papyrus, a scroll over 100 feet long, contains hundreds of remedies, each one ending with a spoken charm. For a stomach ache, they might say, "Come, you who are in my belly, be still as the waters of the Nile at dawn, be calm as the sun when it rises." They believed that words had power, that the breath of the healer could carry the will of the gods into the body of the sick. One of the most fascinating treatments was for the eye, a common ailment in the dusty desert. They would grind green malachite stone into a fine powder, mix it with honey and water, and apply it as a paste. The copper in the malachite worked as a natural antibiotic, long before anyone knew what a microbe was. And as they applied it, they would recite a spell from the goddess Isis, who had healed her own son Horus from a scorpion's sting, calling upon her protection, her nurturing power. Priests of the goddess Sekhmet, the lioness-headed deity of both destruction and healing, were among the most skilled physicians. They would wear amulets of her image and carry a small statue of the goddess, which they would touch to the patient's body while murmuring incantations. Sekhmet could send plagues, but she could also withdraw them. The priest's job was to appease her, to offer incense and recite the book of the last day of the year, a ritual that brought calm to the heart and hope to the sick. Even the most ordinary herbs were seen as gifts from the earth. Garlic was eaten daily to strengthen the body and ward off infection. Onions were placed on tombs to help the dead breathe in the afterlife. Cumin and coriander flavored food, but also helped digestion. And the humble poppy, its milky sap, was used to quiet pain and bring sleep, a gentle dream bringer. The Egyptians understood that healing was a journey, not a battle. They did not shout at illness. They soothed it with honeyed words and soft hands. The physician might lay a hand on the patient's forehead, feel the heat of fever, and say a prayer to the sun god for coolness. They might wrap a broken limb in linen soaked in acacia gum, which hardened like a cast, and then tell a story of how the god Thoth had once repaired the sky after a storm. So as you lie here, drifting toward rest, imagine the quiet rhythm of that ancient healer's voice, the scent of herbs rising in the warm air, the gentle touch of a hand that believed in the power of nature and the kindness of the gods. The Nile still flows, the stars still shine, and the wisdom of those healers, woven from leaves and words, whispers on like a lullaby for the soul. Close your eyes and let the gentle sands of time carry you back to the banks of the great river Nile, under a sky painted with the soft gold of a setting sun. Here, in the land of the Pharaohs, life moved with the rhythm of the seasons, and in that ancient world, women held a place of quiet strength and subtle power, woven into the fabric of society like the threads of a fine linen garment. In ancient Egypt, a woman's world was not one of confinement, but of balance. She was the mistress of the house, the Nebet-per, a title that held deep respect. Her home was her domain, where she managed the household, raised the children, and oversaw the servants. But her influence reached far beyond the walls of mud brick or stone. She could own land, buy and sell property, and even sign contracts in her own name. This was a remarkable freedom, one that would not be seen in many other parts of the world for thousands of years to come. Imagine a woman named Merit, living in the city of Thebes during the New Kingdom. She rises with the sun, the cool morning air flowing through the lattice windows of her home. She wears a simple, white linen dress, tied just below the breast, and her hair is braided with scented oils. Today, she will visit the market along the river. She carries a small basket of figs from her own garden to trade for a new jar of barley beer. At the market, she meets with other women, laughing and bargaining, their voices a soft melody against the background chatter of donkeys and merchants. But Merit's life is not only about domestic duties. She is also a musician trained in the art of the harp. Music was a sacred gift in Egypt, and women often performed in temples, their songs praising the gods. Merit plays at the local temple of Hathor, the goddess of love and joy, during the festival of the beautiful Feast of the Valley. As she strums the strings, the sound echoes through the columns, and the air fills with the scent of myrrh and lotus blossoms. The women of Egypt were the keepers of this sacred harmony, their voices and instruments creating a bridge between the earthly and the divine. And what of the highest of all women, the queen herself? Nefertari, the beloved wife of Ramesses II, was not merely a consort but a partner in power. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens is a masterpiece of art and devotion, with walls covered in vibrant paintings of her journey through the underworld. She was a diplomat, a priestess, and a symbol of the feminine divine. The goddess Isis, who wept for her husband Osiris and magically restored him to life, was the ultimate model for Egyptian women. Every woman, from the peasant to the queen, carried a spark of that divine essence, a quiet resilience that mirrored the Nile's eternal flow. In the fields, women worked alongside men, harvesting wheat and flax, their hands moving in rhythm with the seasons. They wove the flax into linen, the cloth that clothed the nation. They brewed beer, baked bread, and cared for the children. The family was the heart of society, and women were its gentle pulse. But they were also scribes, doctors, and even priestesses. The famous female pharaoh Hatshepsut ruled as a king, her statues showing her with a false beard and broad shoulders, yet her reign was one of peace and prosperity. She built magnificent temples and sent expeditions to the land of Punt, bringing back myrrh trees and exotic goods. Her story is a reminder that in Egypt, a woman could rise to the very top if the stars aligned. As the sun sets over the Nile, painting the water in hues of amber and rose, the women of Egypt gather for the evening meal. They sit on woven mats, sharing stories of the day, the children playing at their feet. The air is thick with the scent of cumin and coriander from the cooking pots. There is a deep sense of contentment, a knowledge that their lives, though often unseen by history, were the foundation of a civilization that lasted for 3,000 years. They were the mothers, the priestesses, the musicians, the queens, and in their quiet, steady way, they helped shape the world. So sleep now, carried by the gentle current of the Nile, and dream of these women of ancient Egypt. Their laughter, their songs, their wisdom, they are not forgotten. They are the soft whisper of the wind through the papyrus reeds, the eternal light of the stars above the desert, a calm and enduring presence in the long, peaceful night. Imagine a city built not by the hands of mortals alone, but by the whispers of gods and the dreams of pharaohs. This is Thebes, the ancient capital of Egypt, a place where the sands of time have cradled both spirit and power for millennia. As you settle into a quiet moment, let your mind drift to the banks of the Nile, where the great river flows like a silver ribbon through a land of golden dunes. Here Thebes rises, not with a roar, but with a gentle majesty that seems to hum with the heartbeat of eternity. The city was known as Waset to its people, but the Greeks called it Thebes, and it became a beacon of civilization. Imagine the soft glow of dawn touching the colossal pillars of the temple of Karnak, where the god Amun-Ra was honored. The air is still, scented with lotus blossoms and the faint trace of incense from long-ago ceremonies. Priests walk in silent procession, their white linen robes brushing the stone floors, while the sound of a distant harp drifts like a lullaby. This was a place where the divine and the earthly met, where every stone was carved with prayers, and every statue seemed to breathe with the spirit of the gods. Power lived here too, in the form of mighty pharaohs who ruled from the throne of the two lands. They built their mortuary temples on the west bank of the Nile, where the sun sets over the Valley of the Kings. Picture the colossi of Memnon, Two enormous stone statues sitting quietly in the fields, their faces turned toward the rising sun. They have watched over this land for thousands of years, their gazes soft and timeless. The pharaohs believed that their spirits would journey through the underworld, guided by the stars, and so they filled their tombs with treasures and spells to ensure a peaceful passage. But Thebes was not only a city of monuments and kings, it was a living, breathing community. Imagine the bustling markets along the river, where merchants traded gold, papyrus, and fragrant oils. The voices of vendors blend into a gentle hum, like the murmur of a distant stream. Children play in the narrow alleys, their laughter echoing off mud-brick walls painted with scenes of daily life. Fishermen cast their nets into the Nile, and farmers tend fields of emerald green wheat. Even in its power, Thebes was a place of simple, peaceful rhythms. As night falls, the city transforms. The stars emerge, so bright they seem close enough to touch. The temples are lit by the soft flicker of oil lamps, casting long shadows that dance like spirits. Priests chant hymns to the gods, their voices rising and falling like a gentle tide. The great pylons of Karnak stand silent under the moon, and the sacred lake reflects the constellations. It is said that the goddess Mut, the mother, watches over Thebes with a loving eye, and that the god Montu, the warrior, protects its borders. But in the quiet of evening, it is the spirit of peace that lingers most. Through centuries of glory and decline, Thebes remained a center of soul and sovereignty. It was sacked by invaders, rebuilt by dreamers, and eventually became a city of ruins, yet its essence never faded. Even today, when you walk among the fallen columns of Luxor temple, you can feel the pulse of ancient life. The stones hold the memory of prayers, the air carries the scent of history, and the Nile continues its eternal flow. So as you lie here, listening to the story of Thebes, let your thoughts wander to that golden city of the past. Imagine yourself standing on the riverbank, feeling the warm breeze on your skin, hearing the distant call of a bird. The power of the pharaohs is gone, but the spirit of Thebes remains, a gentle reminder that even the greatest empires return to the quiet embrace of the earth. And now, let your breath slow, like the Nile itself, and drift into a deep and restful sleep. Imagine a place where time itself seems to stand still, where the golden sands of the desert meet the deep blue of the Nile, and where a king's ambition was carved into the very mountainside. This is the Sun Temple of Abu Simbel, a monument to the great pharaoh Ramesses II, built more than 3,000 years ago. Let us journey there together, gently, softly, as if walking through a dream. Close your eyes, if you like, and picture a vast, silent landscape. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dunes. Before you rises a cliff of sandstone, warm and ochre, and into this cliff, 4 colossal figures are seated, each one a likeness of Ramesses himself. They are enormous, each over 60 feet tall, with calm, unseeing eyes that have watched the dawn rise for millennia. Their hands rest on their knees, their expressions serene, as if they are listening to the whispers of the wind. The temple was built to stand as a testament to Ramesses' power, but also to the gods. It was oriented with such precision that twice a year, on February 22 and October 22, the sun's first rays would pierce through the entrance, travel down the long, dark hall, and illuminate the statues of 3 gods at the inner sanctuary, Ptah, Amun-Ra, and Ramesses himself. Only the god of darkness, Ptah, remained in shadow. This was no accident. It was a celestial dance, a moment of divine connection between the pharaoh and the sun. As you step into the temple's great hall, the air grows cooler, stiller. The walls are covered with reliefs, telling stories of Ramesses' battles, his chariots charging, his enemies falling. Yet there is no violence here, only the quiet record of history. The columns are shaped like giant papyrus stalks, and the painted scenes are faded now, but once they blazed with color, reds, blues, golds. In the dim light, you can almost hear the murmur of ancient priests, the soft shuffle of sandals on stone. Further inside, the passage narrows, leading to the sanctuary, the heart of the temple. Here, in the deepest chamber, the statues of the gods sit on their thrones, waiting. And when the sun reaches them, the whole room glows with a warm, golden light. It is a moment of pure magic, a reminder that even in the stillness of stone, life and light persist. Many centuries later, the temple faced a new challenge. In the 1960s, when the Aswan High Dam was built, the waters of Lake Nasser threatened to drown Abu Simbel forever. An international effort, led by UNESCO, saved it. The entire temple was cut into huge blocks, moved piece by piece, and reassembled on higher ground, like a giant puzzle. It was a feat of modern engineering, but the temple's soul remained intact. The sun still shines into the sanctuary on those two special days, just as it did for Ramesses. Now visitors come from all over the world. They arrive by bus or by boat across the lake. They walk slowly, reverently past the four great seated figures. If you stand before them, you feel small, but not in a frightening way. It is a peaceful smallness, like being a child beneath a great star-filled sky. The desert is quiet. The wind carries the scent of warm stone and dry sand. The sun warms your face, and for a moment you are part of something ancient and vast. The Sun Temple of Abu Simbel is more than a building. It is a story carved in stone, a prayer to the light, a promise that even in the loneliest place on earth, beauty and wonder can endure. So let your thoughts drift, like the sand dunes shifting in the breeze. Let the image of those serene, stone faces settle into your mind, and let the calm of this ancient place carry you softly toward rest. Long ago, along the winding banks of the great river Nile, the ancient Egyptians lived in rhythm with the pulse of the water. Their calendar was not merely a list of days and months, but a living story woven from the land, the sky, and the sacred flood. Picture yourself sitting on a sandy bank as the sun sinks low, painting the papyrus reeds in shades of amber and gold. The air is warm, and the gentle murmur of the river seems to whisper secrets of a time when time itself was measured by the rise and fall of the Nile. The Egyptian year was divided into 3 seasons, each named after the river's most vital act. The first season was Akhit, the season of the inundation. For months, the river would swell, fed by distant rains in the highlands of Ethiopia. The waters would rise slowly, covering the fields, the low villages, and the mud-brick homes that stood on higher ground. To the ancient eye, this was not destruction, but renewal. The flood carried rich, dark silt, black as the fertile soil of Kemet, the Black Land. Farmers watched as the waters crept higher, knowing that when they receded, the land would be reborn. During Akhit, work in the fields ceased. People turned to other tasks, building temples, repairing canals, weaving linen, and carving statues for the tombs that lined the western desert. The season of flood was a time of reflection, of waiting, of trusting in the river's promise. Then came Peret, the season of emergence. As the waters drained away, the land appeared again, glistening and dark. Farmers walked behind wooden plows pulled by oxen, sowing seeds of emmer, wheat, and barley into the soft mud. The fields were divided into neat rectangles by earthen dikes, and the sun, now high and bright, coaxed green shoots from the earth. This was the time of growth. Children played among the young crops, and women carried water jars on their heads, singing songs that had been sung for 1,000 years. The calendar marked this season with festivals honoring the gods of agriculture, especially Osiris, who died and was reborn each year, just as the grain died in the ground and rose again. The days grew longer, and the sky remained a clear, unbroken blue. The air smelled of damp earth and ripening barley. Finally came Shemu, the season of harvest. The grain turned golden, and the heat of summer settled over the land like a heavy blanket. Reapers moved through the fields with sickles, cutting the stalks and binding them into sheaves. Donkeys carried the harvest to threshing floors, where oxen trampled the grain to separate it from the chaff. Then came the windwing, tossing the mixture into the air so the breeze could carry away the lighter chaff, leaving the heavy grain to fall. The granaries filled, and the people gave thanks to the goddess Renewal, the serpent goddess of harvest and nourishment. Shemu was also the season of the rising of Sopdet, the star we call Sirius. Its appearance in the dawn sky just before the sun was the signal that the new flood was near. The Egyptians watched this star with reverence, for it marked the beginning of a new year, a new cycle of Akhit. The calendar itself had 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 extra days at the end of the year, the 5 days of the gods, when the world was said to be especially charged with magic. On those days, the Egyptians celebrated the births of Osiris, Horus, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. They told stories of these deities under the stars, while the river flowed quietly in the darkness. Time for them was not a straight line but a circle, returning again and again to the same seasons, the same floods, the same harvests. Each year was a reflection of the year before, and each season was a chapter in the eternal story of the Nile. So as you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself in that ancient land, where the calendar was written in water and sunlight. Feel the slow rhythm of the flood, the patient growth of the grain, the golden weight of the harvest. The Nile still flows today, carrying the same silt, the same memories. And in the quiet of the night, you can almost hear the soft chant of farmers, the splash of oars, and the whisper of reeds bending in the breeze. Let the seasons of the Nile carry you gently into peaceful dreams. Imagine a land bathed in the golden light of a setting sun, where the great river Nile flows silently through an endless desert. In ancient Egypt, the journey of death was not an end, but a peaceful passage into a realm of eternal beauty and rest. The Egyptians believed that after a life well lived, the soul would embark on a gentle voyage across the horizon, guided by the stars and the soft breath of the north wind. They called this final destination the Field of Reeds, a place where the sun never sets too harshly and the waters are always calm and clear. When a person passed away, their body was tenderly cared for by priests and loved ones. They were wrapped in linen, layer upon layer, like a sleeping child swaddled in the softest cloth. Amulets were placed over the heart, and prayers were whispered into the silence of the tomb. The goal was to preserve the body as a vessel for the soul, so that the spirit could return to visit it, like a gentle breeze through an open window. The heart, they believed, held all the memories and truths of a person's life. It would be weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and harmony, but this was not a trial of fear. It was a moment of peaceful reflection, a quiet accounting of kindness and love. In the duet, the underworld, the soul traveled through caverns lit by the soft glow of stars and torches. The journey was not without challenges, but they were met with serenity. The soul carried a map of the underworld, inscribed on the walls of the tomb, and recited spells of protection. The ferryman, a silent figure, rowed the boat across the dark waters. The soul did not rush. It drifted, watching the shadows of the night fade into the first light of dawn. At the end of the journey, the soul arrived at the Hall of Two Truths. There before the great scales, the heart was placed upon one side and the feather upon the other. If the heart was light, if it held no heavy burdens of cruelty or deceit, the scales balanced perfectly. The soul was then welcomed by Osiris, the god of the afterlife, who sat upon his throne with a calm, gentle smile. He did not judge. He simply recognized the truth of the soul's journey. And then the soul was led into the Field of Reeds. It was a landscape of eternal spring, where the Nile flowed through fields of green and the air was filled with the scent of lotus flowers. The soul could farm the land or sail upon the lake or simply rest under the shade of a great sycamore tree. There was no pain, no sorrow, only a deep, abiding peace. The sun rose each morning and the stars shone each night, just as they had in the world above. The soul could visit the living in dreams like a whisper of comfort, and the soul could be reborn again, if it wished, into a new life, carrying the wisdom of the ages. The ancient Egyptians did not fear death. They saw it as a gentle transition, a return to the arms of the divine. To them, the afterlife was a promise of eternal rest, a place where the soul could finally be still. The pyramids and tombs were not monuments of the dead, but homes for the living spirit. And in the quiet of the desert night, when the wind whispers through the sand, one can almost hear the soft murmur of the souls who have traveled that peaceful path. They are not gone, they are simply drifting among the stars, watching over the land they loved, eternal and serene. So close your eyes, listen to the gentle flow of the Nile, and feel the warmth of the sun. Let the story of the Egyptian afterlife carry you into a deep, restful sleep, where all burdens are light and the heart is at peace. Good night, traveler. May your dreams be as quiet as the ancient sands and as endless as the stars. Imagine, if you will, a land where the sun blazes golden over endless sands and the great river Nile winds like a serpent through the heart of an ancient world. This is Egypt, a place of pyramids and temples, of pharaohs and gods. But in the quiet corners of its homes, there lived a creature of grace and mystery, the cat. To the ancient Egyptians, a cat was not merely a pet, but a sacred presence, a guardian of the hearth, and a bridge to the divine. In every household, from the humblest mud-brick dwelling to the grandest villa of a noble, a cat was welcomed with reverence. They were known as Mao, a word that echoed the sound of their soft mew. The Egyptians believed that cats brought good fortune and prosperity. A cat in the home was a sign of blessings, and to harm one was considered a grave transgression, often punishable by law. The gentle purr of a cat was thought to soothe the spirits and ward off evil, much like a lullaby for the soul. Picture a family home at dusk. The air is warm and filled with the scent of bread baking and incense burning. A sleek, golden-eyed cat lounges near the hearth, its fur catching the flicker of the oil lamps. Children play nearby, but they are careful not to disturb the cat, for they have been taught that the cat is a protector. It guards the grain stores from mice and rats, ensuring the family's food supply remains safe. More than that, it watches over the children, curling beside them as they sleep, its soft rumble a promise of safety. The cat is a silent sentinel, its presence a comfort against the unknown. Reverence for cats went beyond the practical. They were seen as embodiments of the goddess Bastet, a deity of home, fertility, and protection. Bastet was often depicted as a woman with the head of a lioness or a domestic cat, holding a sistrum, a musical instrument that chased away evil. In many homes, small statues of Bastet were placed near the entrance, and the family cat was treated as her living representative. When the cat yawned, it was said to be praying to the sun god Ra. When it stretched, it was aligning itself with the cosmos. Every movement was a sacred dance. Families would adorn their cats with jewelry, collars of gold and silver, earrings of lapis lazuli, and anklets of carnelian. They were fed the choicest morsels, often from the family's own plates. Some cats were even mummified after death, wrapped in linen and placed in tiny coffins, adorned with amulets, so they might accompany their owners into the afterlife. The grief of losing a cat was profound. Families would shave their eyebrows as a sign of mourning, and the cat's body would be taken to a sacred necropolis at Bubastes, the city of Bastet, for a proper burial. But the bond was not one-sided. The cats, in their aloof and affectionate ways, returned the devotion. They would curl on the laps of the elderly, bringing warmth to aching bones. They would chase away scorpions and snakes that might slither into the home. They were companions in solitude, silent friends who understood the language of the heart. In the quiet of the night, as the family slept, the cat would walk softly through the rooms, its eyes glowing like embers, ensuring all was well. It was a living talisman, a piece of the divine made flesh. The Egyptians also believed that cats had the power to see into the spirit world. Their eyes, which reflected the moonlight, were thought to hold secrets of the gods. When a cat stared into the darkness, it was not just watching for prey, but guarding against unseen forces. In this way, the cat was a bridge between the earthly and the eternal, a quiet companion on life's journey. To have a cat in an ancient Egyptian home was to invite peace, protection, and a touch of the sacred into daily life. And so, for centuries, the cat was cherished, not as a possession, but as a beloved guardian, a soft shadow of grace in the golden land of the pharaohs. Beneath a canopy of stars that have watched over the same spot for more than 4,000 years, the great Sphinx of Giza rests its lion's body upon the warm limestone plateau. Its human face, weathered and serene, gazes eastward toward the rising sun, as it has done every dawn since the time of the pharaohs. There is something profoundly peaceful about this ancient guardian, carved from a single ridge of rock, its paws stretching forward as if it might rise at any moment and pad silently across the sands. But it does not move. It waits and watches, a silent witness to the passage of time. Imagine the world when the Sphinx was new. The pyramids of Giza, still gleaming with smooth white casing stones, reflected the sun like mirrors. Workers in linen kilts hauled stone, chanted hymns, and the air smelled of dust and resin. The Sphinx was not yet old. It was a young monument, perhaps built for Pharaoh Khafa, its face carved to resemble his own, a symbol of royal power and divine protection. In those early centuries, priests would have performed rituals at its feet, offering incense and prayers to the sun god Ra. The Sphinx, they believed, guarded the necropolis, a sentinel against evil spirits, a keeper of secrets. As centuries flowed by like the Nile's slow current, the Sphinx witnessed empires rise and fall. The Greeks came, calling it a mythical creature, half lion, half woman, and told stories of its riddles. The Romans admired its ancient dignity, leaving graffiti scratched into nearby stones. The Arabs, when they arrived, called it Abu al-Hal, the father of terror, not from fear, but from awe at its immense stillness. Sand drifted over its body, burying it up to the neck for long ages, so that only the head remained visible, a strange head rising from a desert sea. Travelers in the Middle Ages would see it and wonder what forgotten kingdom had left this lonely face behind. And still the Sphinx waited. It watched the desert winds sculpt new dunes and the stars wheel overhead. It felt the vibrations of camel caravans and later the rumble of automobiles. It saw Napoleon's soldiers camp in its shadow and heard the crack of rifles during battles for control of the land. Through all of this, the Sphinx remained silent. Its expression, calm, slightly smiling, with eyes that seemed to hold both wisdom and mystery, never changed. Even when thieves and vandals broke off its nose and cannonballs scarred its chest, the Sphinx did not complain. It endured. Today, when you stand before the Great Sphinx, you feel a deep stillness. The noise of modern Cairo fades into a distant hum. The pyramid of Kaffa rises behind it, and the sky stretches wide and blue. You notice the details, the layered stone of its body, the missing nose, the quiet dignity of its face. You may find yourself slowing your breath, matching the rhythm of this ancient creature. It has no riddles to ask you, no demands. It simply exists, reminding you that time flows like a river, and that some things remain, solid and patient, through all the changes. There is a comfort in that, a reassurance that even as your own life passes with all its worries and joys, there is a deeper, slower pulse to the world. The Sphinx embodies that pulse. It is a bridge between the human and the eternal, carved by hands long turned to dust, yet still speaking to us across the millennia. As you drift towards sleep, let your thoughts rest on that stone face, bathed in moonlight, silent, watching. The Sphinx does not need to speak. Its presence is enough. And in that presence, you can find a quiet peace, a lullaby in stone, a witness that has seen everything and remains calm. So close your eyes now, and imagine you are there, sitting on the warm sand, the stars above, the Sphinx beside you, both of you breathing softly in the night. There is no rush, no urgency, only stillness, only the slow turning of the earth and the patient gaze of the great Sphinx, who has been watching over this place since before history began and will watch long after we are gone. Imagine a time when the world was young, and the great city of Alexandria glimmered on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a place of wonder, where ships from distant lands brought spices, silks, and stories. But the greatest treasure of Alexandria was not gold or silver. It was knowledge. Gathered in a magnificent building near the royal palace, the Library of Alexandria stood as a beacon of human curiosity, a sanctuary for the wisdom of the ancients. In those days, scholars from every corner of the known world would travel to Alexandria, drawn by the promise of learning. They came from Greece, from Egypt, from Persia, and even from India. They brought with them scrolls of papyrus, clay tablets, and manuscripts written on parchment. The library's shelves, it is said, held hundreds of thousands of these precious texts. Think of it, a vast collection of poems, histories, scientific treatises, and philosophical dialogues. Each scroll was a voice from the past, speaking of stars and gods, of medicine and mathematics. The library was not just a storage place. It was a living, breathing center of thought. Scholars walked its colonnades, debating the nature of the universe under the shade of marble pillars. They read aloud in quiet halls, their voices mixing with the rustle of papyrus. The great minds of the age gathered here: Euclid, who wrote the foundations of geometry; Eratosthenes, who measured the circumference of the earth with a simple stick and a shadow; and the poet Callimachus, who organized the vast collection into a catalogue of all known literature. But the library was more than a building. It was a dream. The rulers of Alexandria, the Ptolemies, wanted to collect all the knowledge of the world. They sent agents to every port, buying or borrowing scrolls. Sometimes they would even keep a ship's cargo until the scribes had copied every text aboard. The library grew, and with it, the city's reputation as a cradle of enlightenment. Yet, as with all things, time passed. The library's story is not one of a single dramatic fire, but of a slow fading. Wars and political changes chipped away at its treasures. Parts of the collection were damaged in conflicts, some scrolls were lost in shipwrecks, and others simply decayed with age. The great building may have been damaged in the Roman period, and later, the rise of new religious and political powers shifted the focus away from the old learning. By the time of the Arab conquest in the 7th century, the library was a shadow of its former self. The last of its scrolls were likely scattered, used as fuel for bathhouses, or simply crumbled to dust. And so the Library of Alexandria vanished, but its legacy did not. The ideas that once lived on its shelves survived, carried by travelers, copied by monks, and rediscovered during the Renaissance. The very concept of a universal library, a place where all human knowledge is gathered, began here. Today, when we search for answers on the internet, we are, in a way, following the dream of the ancient librarians. As you drift into sleep, picture that great library under the moonlight. The sea breeze carries the scent of salt and old paper. The marble floors are cool beneath your feet. You walk through the aisles, each scroll a quiet friend waiting to share its secrets. The voices of the past whisper softly, and the stars above Alexandria shine as they did centuries ago. A gentle reminder that knowledge, like the night sky, is endless and beautiful. Rest now and dream of a world where every question has a home. In the ancient land of Kemet, where the great river Nile flowed like a silver ribbon through the golden sands, the art of weaving linen was a sacred craft, as old as the pyramids themselves. It was a quiet, patient work, passed from mother to daughter, from father to son, for thousands of years, long before the first pharaohs wore the double crown. The flax plant, with its slender green stalks and delicate blue flowers, was the gift of the gods, a humble weed that could be transformed into the finest cloth the world had ever known. Imagine the fields along the riverbank, where the air was warm and smelled of damp earth and blooming lotus. Farmers would harvest the flax by hand, pulling the stalks gently from the soil, careful not to bruise them. They would lay the stems in the sun to dry, then gather them in bundles, tied with reed. The next step was retting, soaking the flax in shallow pools of water for days, until the outer husks softened and could be peeled away. The process was slow, almost meditative, and the workers would sing softly as they watched the fibers loosen, their voices blending with the rustle of palm fronds and the distant cry of ibises. Once retted, the stems were beaten with wooden mallets to separate the long, silky fibers from the woody core. This was a rhythmic, soothing sound, thump, 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 like a heartbeat across the village. The fibers were then combed into fine strands, using combs made of bone or thorn, and spun into thread on simple drop spindles. The spinners would sit in the shade of acacia trees, their hands moving in a gentle, circular motion, twisting the fibers into a continuous, unending thread. The thread was the color of pale honey, or creamy ivory, or the softest white of winter clouds. The weaving itself took place on horizontal looms, laid flat on the ground or raised on low frames. The weaver would sit cross-legged, passing the shuttle back and forth, each movement a quiet dedication. The threads were so fine that a single piece of cloth could be as wide as a man's outstretched arms, yet so sheer that it could be pulled through a finger ring. For the pharaohs, the linen was bleached to a dazzling white, bleached in the sun and washed in the Nile until it gleamed. Sometimes it was pleated, with folds so sharp they seemed carved from stone, or dyed with madder root for red, woad for blue, and saffron for gold. But white was the color of purity, of the gods, of the eternal. When a pharaoh was to be dressed, it was not a simple matter of pulling on a garment. The linen was carefully unfolded, each yard of cloth a story of rain and sun, of patient hands and whispered prayers. The chief priest would anoint the ruler with sacred oils, and then, with the help of attendants, they would wrap the white cloth around his body, layer upon layer, until he stood like a statue of light. The linen was so fine it seemed to float, catching the desert breeze, making the pharaoh appear not quite human, but as a being of another realm. For the great ceremonies, he might wear a sheer, pleated kilt that fell to his knees, held by a jeweled belt, or a long, flowing robe that draped over one shoulder, leaving the other bare to show the strength of his arm. His headdress, too, was of linen, the Nemes headcloth, striped in blue and gold, or the simple white crown of Upper Egypt, wrapped securely so that not a strand of hair could escape. But linen was not just for the living. In the tombs of the pharaohs, vast amounts of linen were stored, hundreds of yards, sometimes thousands, for the journey into the afterlife. The mummies were wrapped in layer after layer of the finest cloth, each strip wound with ritual words and fragrant resin. The cloth was a bridge between this world and the next, a symbol of rebirth, of the sun rising each morning over the Nile. Even in death, the pharaohs were clothed in linen, so that they might stand before the gods in garments worthy of their glory. So as you drift towards sleep, think of those ancient weavers, their fingers dancing with light, turning a simple plant into something transcendent. The linen they made was more than cloth. It was a prayer, a poem, a promise. And perhaps in your dreams, you might feel its gentle touch, cool and smooth, as if you yourself were wrapped in the very fabric of eternity. Imagine, if you will, a time long ago, along the banks of the Great Nile, where the golden sands of Egypt meet the lush green fields that bloom each year after the floodwaters recede. This was a land of cycles, of death and rebirth, and nowhere was that more beautifully celebrated than in the festival of Opet. Each year, when the river's swell brought life back to the parched earth, the people of Thebes would gather for a feast of renewal. The festival honored Amun-Re, the king of the gods, and his divine family, Mut, the mother goddess, and Khonsu, the moon child. For them, the festival was a time when the boundaries between the mortal and the divine grew thin, and the pharaoh himself would be reborn. The journey began at the great temple of Karnak, a vast stone forest of columns and obelisks. Inside its shadowy halls, priests would lift the sacred bark, a model boat of cedar and gold, adorned with feathers and precious stones, carrying the statue of Amun-Re. The bark was not merely a relic, it was believed to be the god's living vessel, filled with his spirit. As the procession emerged into the sunlight, the crowd would murmur a soft prayer, their voices like the rustle of papyrus in the wind. Slowly, the parade moved along the avenue of sphinxes, a 3-kilometer path lined with ram-headed guardians, each carved from sandstone, their eyes gazing eternally toward Luxor. The air was thick with incense, frankincense and myrrh, and the scent of lotus blossoms, which the people carried in their hands. Musicians played harps and sistrums, their rhythms gentle and hypnotic, like the lapping of the Nile against the riverbanks. Priests and dancers swayed in linen robes, their bodies anointed with oil. The pharaoh, dressed in the white crown of Upper Egypt, walked barefoot, his steps deliberate and humble. He was not just a ruler here, he was the son of the gods, and the festival was his chance to be renewed, to drink from the well of divine power so that the land might prosper. The people watched, their hearts full of hope, for the flooding of the Nile had brought mud and promise, and now the god's journey would ensure the harvest. At the temple of Luxor, the procession would pause. Here, in a sanctuary of limestone and shadow, the statue of Amun-Re would be reunited with his wife Mut and their child Khonsu. The air grew still, and the priests chanted ancient hymns, their voices echoing off the painted walls. The pharaoh would enter the inner sanctum alone, and there in the darkness he would undergo a ritual of transformation, a symbolic death and rebirth. When he emerged, his crown seemed brighter, his eyes clearer. He was no longer just a man, he was Horus, the living god, ready to guide his people through another year. The festival lasted for days, sometimes as long as 27 days, as the river's rhythm dictated. Boats filled with revelers floated on the Nile, their lanterns reflecting like stars on the water. The people would feast on bread and beer, on roasted duck and figs, and they would tell stories of the gods, of creation, and the eternal return. Children played, old men rested, and women sang songs of gratitude. It was a time of peace, when war and worry were forgotten, and the only thing that mattered was the gentle pulse of the river and the promise of renewal. As the sun set over the western cliffs, the bark would return to Karnak, carried on the shoulders of priests who moved like shadows. The crowd would fall silent, watching the statue disappear into the temple's dark heart, and then softly the people would disperse, their footsteps muffled by the sand. The festival was over, but its magic lingered, a whisper of eternity in the wind, a reminder that life, like the Nile, always flows back to its source. And so, as you drift towards sleep, think of the festival of Opet, not as a distant spectacle, but as a gentle river of time, carrying you through the night, renewing your spirit with each soft breath. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a warm breeze stirring the reeds along the Nile. The air is soft, carrying the scent of lotus blossoms and sun-baked clay. In the cool shade of a temple library, a scribe sits cross-legged on a woven mat, his reed pen poised over a sheet of papyrus. This is the dawn of the 13th century before our time, in the city of Thebes, where the great river glimmers like a ribbon of silver under a golden sun. The scribe's name is Ani, and he is not a king or a priest, but a humble accountant of the sacred offerings, a steward of the temple grain. Yet his work will outlast the pyramids, for he is crafting a scroll that will become a gentle guide through the mystery of the afterlife, the Papyrus of Ani, a treasure of quiet wisdom. This scroll is not a book of fearsome judgment, but a companion for the soul's journey. Painted with delicate strokes of black and red ink, the papyrus unfurls like a long, soft carpet of stories. Its illustrations are tender and precise, a heart being weighed against a feather, a boat sailing through starlit waters, a field of reeds where the blessed wander in eternal peace. The feather belongs to Maat, the goddess of truth and harmony, whose presence is as calm as the first light of dawn. Arni's heart, light as a fallen leaf, is placed on one side of the scale and the feather on the other. If his heart is pure, it balances perfectly, and he is allowed to pass into the field of reeds, a place of gentle rivers and abundant harvests, where the soul can rest and tend to gardens forever. But this papyrus is more than a map for the dead. It is a mirror for the living. As Ani writes, he pours into each hieroglyph a lesson, to speak softly, to give bread to the hungry, to honor the small moments of kindness. The scroll teaches that the afterlife is not a reward for grand deeds, but a natural continuation of a life lived with gentle balance. There is no fire or torment here, only the quiet weighing of one's own truth. Arni's hand trembles with care as he inscribes the words, "I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not made anyone weep." Each line is a breath, each image a prayer for peace. As the centuries pass, the papyrus is buried with Ani in a simple tomb, wrapped in linen and laid beside a jar of cool water and a loaf of bread. The world above changes, empires rise and fall, the sands shift, and the Nile changes its course. But the scroll remains, nestled in the dark, waiting. In the 19th century, a traveler discovers it, and it is carried to a museum in London, where it rests under soft light. Visitors walk past, whispering, their eyes tracing the ancient lines. They see the feather, the heart, the gentle smile of Ani in his boat, and they feel a strange calm, as if the scroll still speaks, a voice from across 4,000 years, saying, "You are not alone. Your life matters, not for its noise, but for its quiet truth." Today, the Papyrus of Ani is known as the Book of the Dead, but its true name is the Book of Coming Forth by Day. It is not a book of endings, but of gentle beginnings. Each morning, as the sun rises over the Nile, we too can come forth, with a heart as light as a feather and a spirit as calm as the river's flow. So rest now, and let the wisdom of Ani's scroll cradle your thoughts. You are held, you are balanced, and you are at peace. Imagine a time long before the great pyramids of Giza, when the sands of Egypt were still young and the art of building in stone was just beginning. This is the story of the step pyramid of Djoser, the first colossus ever raised by human hands, a monument that changed the world forever. It begins around 4,700 years ago, in the early days of the Third Dynasty. The land of the Nile was ruled by a pharaoh named Djoser. He was a wise and powerful king, but he dreamed of something more than a simple mastaba tomb, the flat, bench-like structures that had been used for centuries to house the dead. Djoser wanted a home for his soul that would reach toward the heavens, a stairway of stone to carry him into the afterlife. To make this dream real, Djoser turned to a remarkable man named Imhotep. Imhotep was not just a priest and a physician, he was an architect, a visionary, a man who saw shapes in the desert where others saw only sand. Under his guidance, workers began to quarry limestone blocks from the cliffs near Memphis. They hauled them on wooden sledges across the hot, dry ground, using ropes and brute strength and the slow rhythm of many hands working together. At first, Imhotep built a traditional mastaba, a square structure of stone. But as he worked, an idea grew in his mind, like a seed pushing through soil. What if he placed a smaller mastaba on top of the first, and then another and another, each one smaller than the last, until the whole thing rose in a series of giant steps? It was a daring thought, one that had never been attempted. But Djoser trusted his architect, and the work continued. Layer by layer, the pyramid grew. The base was enormous, about 140 meters long and 118 meters wide, covering an area that could hold entire villages. The sides were not smooth, but stepped, like a giant staircase climbing into the blue sky. When it was finished, it reached a height of over 60 meters, a towering presence that could be seen from miles away, shimmering in the heat of the desert. But the step pyramid was not just a tomb. It was the centerpiece of a vast, walled complex, a city for the dead. Around it, Imhotep built courtyards, chapels, and temples, all decorated with stone carvings that mimicked the reeds and wood of earlier buildings. There was a great enclosure wall, with false gates and a single true entrance. There were dummy buildings, structures that looked real from the outside, but were filled with rubble inside, meant to serve the king's spirit in the next world. The whole complex was oriented to the stars, aligned with the cardinal points, as if the entire site were a map of the cosmos. Deep beneath the pyramid, a network of tunnels and chambers was carved into the bedrock. The burial chamber itself was lined with granite, and there, in the darkness, Djoser's mummified body was laid to rest, surrounded by treasures and offerings. The entrance to this underground world was sealed with a massive stone block, weighing several tons, to protect the pharaoh's eternal slumber. For centuries after its construction, the step pyramid inspired awe. It was the tallest building on Earth, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity. Later pharaohs would look at it and dream of even greater monuments, leading eventually to the perfect pyramids of Giza. But the step pyramid remained special, the first, the original, the one that taught the world how to build in stone. Today, the pyramid still stands in Saqqara, weathered by thousands of years of wind and sand. Some of its casing stones have fallen and the steps are worn, but its outline is unmistakable. When you stand before it, you can feel the weight of time, the quiet presence of the ancient past. The air is still, and the desert stretches out in every direction, golden and peaceful. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the whispers of the workers, the chisel against stone, the slow chants of men pulling ropes. You can imagine Imhotep standing on a dune, watching his creation rise step by step, and Djoser, the king, knowing that his name would live forever, not in the hearts of men alone, but in the stones of the first colossus ever raised by human hands. Imagine, if you will, a land of endless sand and golden sun, where the great river Nile winds like a silver ribbon through the desert. Long before the pyramids rose, before the great temples were carved, the people of this ancient land needed a way to count. They needed to measure the grain in their storehouses, tally the cattle in their herds, and record the passing of the seasons. And so, from the very heart of their civilization, the Egyptian number system was born. A system as elegant and enduring as the desert itself. Close your eyes and picture a scribe sitting cross-legged beside a papyrus scroll, the reeds of the Nile whispering in the breeze. By the soft glow of a clay lamp, his brush dips into a small pot of black ink. With careful, deliberate strokes, he writes the first numbers. For the number 1, he draws a single vertical stroke, like a tall reed. For 2, another stroke beside it. 3, 4, 5, each simple mark adding up, like fingers counting in the sand. This was the foundation of their counting, a system based on the fingers of one hand, but stretched far beyond. But the Egyptians were builders and astronomers, people who needed to count not just sheep, but also the stars. So they created symbols for larger numbers. The number 10 was represented by a heel bone, or perhaps a hobble for cattle. A curved shape like an upside-down U100 was a coil of rope, a perfect spiral, as if the very idea of 100 was something to be wound and stored. 1000 was a lotus flower, a sacred blossom that rose from the mud of the Nile, symbolizing rebirth and eternity. 10,000 was a pointing finger, perhaps a gesture of authority or command. 100,000 was a tadpole or a frog, a creature that appeared in great numbers after the flood. And 1,000,000 was the god Hesh, a man with his arms raised in praise, kneeling beneath the vault of heaven. The number 1,000,000 was so vast, so immense, that it could only be represented by a divine figure. What made this system so peaceful, so wonderfully simple, was that it was additive. To write the number 3,247, a scribe would draw 3 lotus flowers for the thousands, then 2 coils of rope for the hundreds, then 4 heel bones for the tens, and finally 7 strokes for the units. They would line them up, often in a neat row, from largest to smallest. There was no need for a symbol for 0, for emptiness was not a number they needed to hold. The desert, after all, is never truly empty. It is always full of potential, of sand and wind and time. This system was used in every corner of Egyptian life. A farmer counting his harvest would carve the number of bushels into a wooden tally. A tax collector would record the annual tribute, so many jars of oil, so many rolls of linen, so many head of oxen. The great pyramid builders, directing thousands of workers, needed to calculate the volume of stone blocks, the length of ramps, the number of days until the next flood. And in the temples, priests would count the offerings to the gods, each symbol a prayer carved in stone. But perhaps the most beautiful use of these numbers was in the stars. Egyptian astronomers would track the motions of the night sky, marking the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star that heralded the annual flood of the Nile. They would count the years, the months, the days, and the hours, using their number system to weave a calendar that was remarkably accurate. And as they lay on their backs, looking up at the Milky Way, they might have imagined the god Heth, the million-year god, holding up the sky itself. So as you drift towards sleep, think of those ancient scribes, the desert wind, the gentle rustle of papyrus. Their numbers were not just symbols, they were stories. Each stroke a memory, each coil a journey, each lotus a promise of renewal. The Egyptian number system, simple and profound, reminds us that counting is a way of understanding the world, of making sense of the vast, beautiful, infinite desert of existence. And now, let the silence of the stars settle around you, as the numbers fade into the soft, timeless dark. Deep in the western desert of Egypt, where the sands stretch endlessly under sky of brilliant blue, there lies a place that has been a secret sanctuary for millennia. This is the oasis of Siwa, a hidden jewel of emerald palms and ancient springs, cradled by the golden dunes. The journey here is long, across a sea of sand, and the silence of the desert is so profound that you can hear the whisper of your own heartbeat. But as you draw near, the horizon begins to change. The endless sand gives way to the deep green of date palms, the shimmer of salt lakes, and the soft murmur of water bubbling up from the earth. Siwa has been a refuge for travelers, a home for the wise, and a sacred place for the gods themselves, for thousands of years. Imagine the air, cool and fragrant with the scent of fresh dates and blooming jasmine. The sun is gentle here, filtered through the fronds of 1,000 palms. The ancient Greeks called it the land of the palm trees, and they knew it as the home of the oracle of Ammon, a voice so powerful that Alexander the Great himself made the pilgrimage to hear its words. The temple of the oracle still stands, its weathered stones rising from the earth like a sleeping giant, a testament to a time when the gods spoke directly to mortals. The oracle of Ammon was said to bless those who came with wisdom and guidance, and the great conqueror arrived here in 331 BCE, seeking confirmation that he was the son of the god. The temple is carved from the local rock, its walls etched with hieroglyphs and images of the ram-headed god, who watches over the oasis with silent, eternal eyes. But Siwa is not just a place of grand temples and oracles. It is a living, breathing sanctuary where the earth itself gives life. The water that bubbles up from the natural springs is warm and clear, rich with minerals that have soothed weary travelers for centuries. The ancient bath of Cleopatra, a pool of turquoise water surrounded by palm trees, is said to have been a favorite of the legendary queen. The water is as still as glass, reflecting the sky and the leaves above. You can sit by the edge, letting your fingers drift through the lukewarm water and feel the weight of the world slip away. The oasis is also home to the salt lakes, where the water is so dense with salt that you can float effortlessly, your body suspended between earth and sky. The silence here is complete, broken only by the distant call of a bird or the rustle of the wind through the reeds. It is a place of healing, of peace, of timelessness. The village of Siwa itself is a labyrinth of narrow streets, where the houses are built from salt and mud, their walls glowing in the soft light of the setting sun. The people of Siwa have lived here for centuries, preserving their own language, their own traditions. They are known for their hospitality, their gentle smiles, and their deep connection to the land. They welcome the stranger as a guest, offering sweet tea and stories of the desert. The rhythm of life here is slow, measured by the passage of the sun and the moon, by the seasons of the date harvest and the olive groves. There is no rush, no hurry. The oasis teaches you to breathe, to be still, to listen. As night falls, the sky transforms into a tapestry of stars, so bright and close that you feel you could reach out and touch them. The darkness is soft, lit only by the lanterns in the windows of the village. The silence deepens, and the only sound is the gentle rustle of the palm fronds in the breeze. This is the heart of Siwa, a hidden sanctuary where time bends, where the ancient world still whispers, where you can find a stillness that is rare and precious. It is a place that has always been a refuge, a secret garden in the vast desert, waiting for those who seek a moment of peace. And as you drift into sleep, your mind may wander to that distant oasis, to the sound of water, the scent of palms, and the quiet wisdom of the ages. So let your thoughts settle like the sand in the dunes, let your breath flow like the gentle springs, and rest in the knowledge that such places exist, hidden from the noise of the world. The oasis of Siwa is a reminder that beauty and peace are always waiting, just beyond the horizon, waiting for you to find them. Imagine a world of golden sand and endless blue sky, where the sun beats down on ancient stone and the air hums with the quiet of millennia. In the Valley of the Queens, on the west bank of the Nile, lies a hidden doorway carved into the rock. It leads not to a simple tomb, but to a palace built not for the living, but for the afterlife. This is the tomb of Nefertari, beloved wife of the great Pharaoh Ramesses II. And it is one of the most beautiful and sacred places ever created by human hands. Nefertari means beautiful companion, and she was indeed the most cherished of Ramesses' many wives. Her tomb, known to scholars as QV66, was discovered in 1904 by an Italian archaeologist named Ernesto Schiaparelli. But even before that, its existence had been whispered about by local villagers, who spoke of a place so lovely that it must have been painted by the gods themselves. Step inside with me now, into the soft, cool darkness. The walls are not bare stone, but covered from floor to ceiling with vivid paintings. Imagine the colors: deep blues like a twilight sky, rich reds like the setting sun, bright yellows like the pollen of desert flowers. These pigments were ground from precious minerals and mixed with egg yolk or tree sap to make them last for eternity. And last they have, for over 3,000 years. The entrance corridor slopes gently downward, as if inviting you to descend into a dream. On either side, painted figures of gods and goddesses greet you. Here is the goddess Hathor, with her cow horns and sun disk, offering Nefertari a sip of cool water from the underworld. There is the Jed pillar, symbol of stability, and the Ankh, the key of life. The air feels still, as if time itself has paused. As you move deeper into the tomb, the paintings tell a story. It is the journey of Nefertari's soul after death, guided by the gods through the underworld. She must pass through 12 gates, each guarded by a fearsome creature, but she is protected by her knowledge of sacred spells. The Book of the Dead is written on the walls, in elegant hieroglyphs that curve like river reeds. The main chamber, the burial hall, is a vast room with a high ceiling painted to look like the night sky, scattered with stars. In the center once stood a massive stone sarcophagus, but now it is empty. The queen's mummy was moved long ago, yet her spirit remains. You can feel it in the gentle breeze that seems to flow through the chamber, as if she is still breathing. One of the most touching scenes shows Nefertari playing a game of Senet, a board game similar to backgammon. The game was symbolic, a way for her to triumph over death itself. She sits on a chair with lion claws, her dress made of the finest linen, her wig adorned with gold and lotus flowers. Her smile is serene, as if she knows the game is already won. Behind her, a table is laden with offerings: bread, figs, grapes, and a jug of wine. These were real gifts left by priests and family members, meant to nourish her soul for all eternity. The tomb was not just a resting place, but a banquet hall for a never-ending feast. The paintings also show Nefertari being presented to the gods of the afterlife. Osiris, lord of the underworld, sits on his throne, wrapped in white bandages like a mummy. He holds a crook and flail, symbols of kingship over the dead. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, leads Nefertari by the hand, weighing her heart against a feather on the scales of justice. If her heart is as light as the feather, she will live forever in the field of reeds, a paradise of green meadows and cool canals. Every inch of the tomb is covered with protective symbols. The Eye of Horus, the scarab beetle, the knot of Isis. These were not mere decorations. They were powerful magic, designed to keep evil spirits away and guide the queen safely through the darkness. But time has been both kind and cruel. The tomb was closed for many years to protect the fragile paintings from humidity and tourists. Today, a visitor can only see a replica because the original is too precious to risk. Yet even in photographs, the beauty takes your breath away. The colors remain so brilliant that they seem to have been painted yesterday. The gold of Nefertari's jewelry still glows with a warm light, as if lit from within. As we slowly make our way back up the corridor, the sounds of the outside world intrude once more. The honk of a taxi, the distant call of a muezzin, the buzz of a fly. But inside the tomb, all is silent and timeless. Nefertari sleeps in her painted palace, surrounded by her gods, her games, and her dreams. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough, you can hear her gentle laughter echoing through the centuries. Let us leave her now to her long slumber, knowing that some treasures are best kept in the quiet dark, where only the stars can see them. Good night, Nefertari. Good night, beautiful queen. On the banks of the Nile, where the water flows slow and deep, there lies a story that has been told for thousands of years. It is a gentle echo, carried on the wind across the sands of time. This is the legacy of ancient Egypt, a civilization that rose like a quiet dream from the desert and still whispers to us today. Imagine, if you will, a world where the sun rises each morning over the golden pyramids, casting long shadows that stretch across the land. The air is warm, filled with the scent of lotus blossoms and the distant sound of a reed flute. The people of this land, the Egyptians, lived in harmony with the great river, the Nile, which gave them life. They called it Itru, the river that flows, and it brought them water, fish, and rich soil for planting. Every year, the floodwaters would rise, gentle and predictable, like a mother's embrace, covering the fields with a dark, fertile silt. Then, as the waters receded, green shoots would appear and the land would bloom again. In this peaceful rhythm, the Egyptians built their homes, their temples, and their tombs. They believed in a world beyond this one, a place where the soul would journey after death. To prepare for that journey, they built great monuments that would stand for eternity. The pyramids, those massive triangles of stone, were not just tombs, they were stairways to the stars. The Great Pyramid of Giza, with its millions of blocks, rose slowly, stone by stone, as if the earth itself was reaching for the heavens. And inside, in the darkness of the burial chamber, they placed the mummy of the pharaoh, surrounded by treasures and spells to guide him in the afterlife. They wrote these spells on the walls, in the beautiful hieroglyphs that looked like tiny pictures, birds, eyes, snakes, and flowers. Each symbol carried a meaning, a sound, a piece of the story. The Egyptians were a people of great patience and great faith. They carved statues of their gods, with the heads of animals and the bodies of humans, and they offered them food and incense every day. They believed in Ma'at, the idea of balance, truth, and order. The sun god Ra sailed across the sky in a golden boat, bringing light and warmth. At night, he traveled through the underworld, where he fought the serpent Opet, but always he emerged victorious at dawn. This cycle of day and night, life and death, was the heartbeat of their world. And so, the legacy of ancient Egypt is not just in the monuments that still stand, or in the treasures that fill museums. It is in the quiet stories that have been passed down, the names of kings and queens like Hatshepsut, who ruled as a pharaoh, and Nefertiti, whose beauty still captivates us. It is in the invention of the calendar, with 365 days, and the use of papyrus to write down their thoughts. They wrote love poems, medical texts, and instructions for building ships. They played board games, wore jewelry, and sang songs under the moon. Today, when we walk through the halls of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, we see their faces staring back at us from golden masks. We see the mummies wrapped in linen, peaceful and still. But the true echo of their time is not in the silence of the tomb, it is in the way they lived, with reverence for nature, for the divine, and for each other. They built a civilization that lasted over 3,000 years, a gentle giant that never lost its wonder. As the sun sets over the Nile, the water turns to gold, and the sky becomes a soft lavender. The pyramids stand silent, guardians of a dream, and if you listen closely, you might hear the faint sound of a flute, carried on the breeze, a melody from a time long ago, but never forgotten. The legacy of ancient Egypt is a gentle echo, and it will always be a part of our world, whispering to us as we drift into sleep.